I was visiting my uncle in Sacramento with my brother and dad. My uncle lives in my deceased grandparents' house. Upon entering, I didn't feel anything particularly strange. No heaviness or sense of unease. It's a nice house with a 1950s flair, though my uncle has done some modern renovations. We were staying there for the week. My brother was going to sleep in a bedroom at the back of the house, my dad on the living room couch, and my uncle on the couch in the den. I was assigned my grandparents' bedroom. The first 3 days were uneventful. I felt comfortable, although I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Only when I was in my grandparents' bedroom. It wasn't threatening or scary, but it was noticeable. However, on the 4th day, something strange happened. I was asleep when I felt the bed start shaking violently. The odd part is that I didn't react the way I thought I would. I was almost numb to it, or maybe I just didn't want to believe it was happening. My eyes briefly opened, but instead of getting up, I just fell back asleep, almost as if it didn't bother me. The next morning, I didn't mention it to anyone because it hadn't really affected me yet, but it had definitely gotten my attention. That night, I fell into a deep sleep right away, and that's when I had a dream that still stands out in my memory. In the dream, I saw a translucent, bright green orb with a long tail trailing along the ground as it floated through the air. It was like I was watching a movie. It floated from my grandparents' bedroom door, down the hallway toward the room where my brother was sleeping, and eventually into his bedroom. The orb paused there, seemingly surveying the room in great detail. I remember seeing the furniture and objects in the room so vividly, even though I had never stepped foot inside that bedroom before. Suddenly, in the middle of the dream, the door to my grandparents' bedroom slammed shut with a loud bang. I instantly woke up, this time fully alert. I jumped out of bed and flung the door open, rushing down the hallway to my brother's room. He was fast asleep. There was no way he could have closed the door and made it back to his bed before I got there. Feeling a little spooked, I checked on my dad. He was asleep on the couch in the living room. I went to the den where my uncle was also passed out. The light was still on, so I turned it off before heading back. It was around 2 a.m. when this happened, but despite the strange events, I didn't have any trouble falling back to sleep. However, I was left feeling confused and uneasy. The following day, I felt unusually drowsy in the afternoon, so I decided to take a nap in my grandparents' bedroom. Again, I fell into a deep sleep, which was unusual for me because I'm naturally the type who gets homesick and doesn't adjust well to new environments. When I woke up, I went to the kitchen and casually asked my uncle if he had asked me anything earlier because I vaguely remembered him knocking on the door. I had this hazy memory of him asking me something before quickly closing the door. To my surprise, he told me that I had leaned up on my elbow, looked directly at him with my eyes wide open, muttered something incoherent, and then fell back onto the bed, still asleep. That freaked me out because I had no recollection of doing that. It was something that had never happened to me before. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep in the room again. I felt uneasy, so I went to the computer room to distract myself by surfing the web. The door was slightly ajar, just cracked open, but I kept seeing something, a shadow, moving back and forth in the hallway, peeking through the crack. The sense of being watched was overwhelming, and fear began to take hold. I closed the door and turned on the light, which made me feel a little better. But I still didn't go back to my grandparents' room until about 5 a.m., after the fear had subsided a bit. Overall, it was a strange experience, one I still can't fully explain. I've encountered spirits before, but this was different. Whatever it was had physically shaken the bed and slammed the door, something I hadn't experienced before. Looking back, I believe it might have been my grandparents trying to get my attention. I'm 35 years old, and I'm writing my story to share it with everyone, hoping to find out if anyone else has experienced what I have. To give you a bit of background, I grew up in Monterey, California, and between 1978 and 1981, my family moved to several different cities. In 1982, we finally settled in Hollister, California. As some of you might know, Hollister was a very small town in the early 80s. We lived in an old Victorian house. It was creepy, sure, but it was only a single-story house. There were rumors that someone had committed suicide in what used to be the attic, but those stories were quickly dismissed. I've always been easily scared, and while others might ignore tales like that, I couldn't shake them. Even as a child in the 80s, I had always felt sensitive to and drawn to the paranormal. We lived in that house for 7 years, and I can recall at least 15 to 20 paranormal experiences that I personally had during that time. Other members of my family had strange encounters too, but for some reason we didn't want to believe them. In 1987, we moved back to the Monterey Peninsula. Now, the story I want to share is about something that happened later in life, when my 2 sisters and I moved into an apartment together in our 20s. The apartment we were moving into was pretty run down when we first saw it. There were holes in the living room walls, as if someone had punched through them, and the carpet had a burnt mark right in the center of the room. It gave me a bad feeling the moment I walked in, but my sister's friend assured us that the owners would renovate the place before we moved in. When we returned, the apartment had been completely transformed. It was beautiful with new everything, well, except for the kitchen, which still looked like it was from the 70s. But we didn't mind. We were excited to start this new chapter together. It was a 1-bedroom apartment, and the 3 of us made it work by taking turns sharing the queen bed while one of us slept on the floor. We were still in the process of buying furniture and were in desperate need of another bed or 2. First, everything was great. We went to school and work, and at night we'd settle in. But there was one thing that disturbed us. Every night, we'd hear the baby next door crying. It wasn't just a normal cry, though. It was a terrified, haunting cry, like something or someone was hurting the child. We'd hear the parent come in to try to calm the baby down, but the cries persisted, night after night. After a few nights of this, it really started to bother me. I told my sister that if someone was hurting that baby, I would call the police and report them to CPS. I wasn't joking. The baby's cries were so unsettling, it left me feeling uneasy every night. Then came the night when everything changed. The baby started crying again, as usual, and I told my sister, "That's it. I'm going to report this family to CPS." I asked her to say a small prayer to help us sleep and to include the baby in her prayer. It was my turn to sleep on the bed, and my other sister was sleeping on the floor. My sister started praying. I don't remember all of what she said, but part of it went something like this. "God, we come to you tonight to thank you for this day. We ask that you keep us safe and help us to have a productive day tomorrow. And we also ask that you help the child next door, who cries all night. We hope no one is hurting him. Please be with him tonight." Right then, all 3 of us felt something large enter the room. My sister stopped praying, and my other sister immediately jumped into the bed with us. I asked, "Do you feel that? It feels heavy, like something is in the room." Both of them nodded, terrified. We lay there, frozen with fear, afraid to move. Whatever it was felt massive, like a thick, heavy presence that moved through our room and into the neighbor's apartment. I begged my sister to continue the prayer, and she did. As she finished, a calmness washed over us. The heaviness lifted, and then I noticed something else. The baby had stopped crying. I pointed it out to my sisters, and we all agreed that we should continue praying every night. Soon after that night, we found a new apartment and moved out. It was the best decision we made. To this day, my sisters don't like talking about that night. They believe that by not speaking of it, it's as if it never happened. But I remember it clearly, and I share this story now, hoping to find others who may have experienced something similar. It would be comforting to know I'm not alone in this. I've never really been religious, so I didn't fully understand what I was seeing or why it was happening. The truth is, I've been seeing the shadows for as long as I can remember. They always appeared human, taller than me, but they were confined to the walls, like shadows that didn't care about the direction of the light. Whenever I told people about what I could see, they didn't believe me, so I stopped mentioning it. For the most part, the shadows left me alone. That is, until 2 years ago. The first time I saw a shadow outside of its usual place, on the wall, was at my friend Sarah's house. Sarah lives in a fairly new subdivision, with an empty block of land right across the street. In the middle of that block, there used to be an old oak tree, but the city cut it down when they started building the houses. It was around 10:30 p.m., and we were sitting on a hammock in Sarah's front yard. Suddenly, I got this overwhelming feeling of being watched. I looked toward the empty block, and my heart nearly stopped. There, where the oak tree used to be, I saw a figure. At first, it looked human, but something about it felt off. Sarah noticed that I had stopped talking and followed my gaze, but she couldn't see it. Still, she said she felt uneasy. Then, the figure started moving toward us, growing taller as it did. I couldn't take it anymore, so I grabbed Sarah's hand, and we ran inside, locking the door behind us. Something in me told me that we needed to be in the living room, where a statue of Mary stood. That night, I had nightmares about the figure catching us. The last thing I saw before waking up were glowing red eyes. I haven't gone outside Sarah's house at night since. A year later, in the middle of my sophomore year, I was dating a guy named Daniel. His family is very religious. His father is a pastor, and his older sister is the youth pastor at our church. One night, around 3 a.m., I was texting Daniel when I noticed a shadow standing at the edge of my bed. I had a strong urge to tell Daniel about it, but I ignored it and went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up with scratches across my back. I tried convincing myself that I must have done it in my sleep, but a voice in my head whispered, "You sleep on your back." Later that day, I told Daniel what had happened. To my surprise, he believed me. He said that what I was seeing were night terrors, also known as demons. I asked him why this demon had attacked me that night when it never had before. Daniel thought it might be because the demon didn't like me talking to him. It didn't want me asking for help from God. That same day, I spoke to Daniel's dad. He asked me about my past, so I told him about how my biological mother hadn't taken care of me or my brother. She was addicted to drugs and gambling, spending my dad's checks at casinos instead of paying the bills. Thankfully, when I was 4, they divorced, and my dad remarried a wonderful woman who I proudly call Mom. Daniel's dad suggested that during my mother's pregnancy, she might have unknowingly created a doorway for the demons to come through, and that they had been with me ever since. He told me how I could ask God for protection, but I had to be willing to let Jesus into my heart. That night, I decided to take his advice. Daniel's dad drove me home, and I went into my room, determined to get rid of the demon. But as soon as I stepped inside, everything went wrong. Shadows were everywhere. They knew what I was planning, and they weren't going to let it happen. What terrified me the most was the laughter. It wasn't just any laughter. It was filled with malice, the kind that comes from a soul that enjoys suffering. The laughter was so overwhelming, I feared that if any of the shadows touched me, I would be consumed, blown to dust, and that awful sound would be the last thing I ever heard. In sheer panic, I dropped to my knees and begged God to make it stop, to take my fear and turn it into strength so I could fight them. After a few minutes of frantic pleading, everything went quiet. I opened my eyes and saw a figure sitting on my bed. Unlike the shadows, this figure had a kind of glow around it. Inside its silhouette, I saw small, dancing blue lights, like the ones you see after rubbing your eyes. The figure got off the bed and moved next to me. Instantly, I felt calm. I looked around and saw that most of the shadows were gone, and the few that remained were being attacked by those blue lights. Once the shadows were gone, the lights faded, and the figure returned to my bed. It sat there for a moment, and I watched it until it too disappeared, not by fading but simply by no longer being there. Since that night, I haven't had any more trouble with demons. I still see them from time to time, but they always stay far away, never coming close to me. Daniel says I have very strong spirit eyes, something he wishes he had, but I don't feel the same. The things I've seen, the things I've heard, especially that laughter, are terrifying. People who can't see demons might think it sounds exciting or even cool, but they've never heard a demon's laugh. While I'm grateful for this gift and hope I can use it to help others, I'm also deeply afraid of it. I fear that if I fully devote myself to God, I might see even more terrifying things. And one day, the last thing I might see is those red eyes and that horrible laughter. I grew up surrounded by stories of ghosts, angels, and demons, and like my mother and her family, I developed a fascination with the paranormal. I still remember sitting outside in the garden under the trees, listening to my aunts and mother trade stories about their encounters with the other side. As a child, I was terrified of these stories, but I always stayed until the very end, unable to look away. Now, I find myself scouring the internet for true ghost stories, and while they sometimes make me paranoid, I've accepted that whatever these entities are, they're here to stay. I've had my share of ghostly encounters, but one thing that stands out in my house is the quick flashes of people I tend to see. It's almost always a man in a white t-shirt. I can never make out his face, but I've come to recognize the same white t-shirt every time. Some background on the house I live in. My parents bought the flat in 1997, and at first glance, it seemed nice enough. The house was built in the 1980s and hadn't seen much use before we moved in. It's a cozy place, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a big backyard. With 5 kids and a dog, the house was never quiet. My 2 older sisters and I shared a room on one side of the house, while my 2 older brothers shared a small room next to ours. My parents had the master bedroom across the hall. As for the strange occurrences, they started small. The door to my room would always open slightly, even though there wasn't a draft. My sisters and I jokingly named the entity Charlie. Whenever the door would open, we'd greet Charlie and go back to whatever we were doing. Nothing really scary happened, until one night when my sister's friend slept over. We all squeezed into the bunk bed, and I fell asleep before the others. The next morning, I overheard my sister and her friend talking about hearing scratching noises on the wall during the night. Curious, they had gone outside to check and found that our bikes had been moved, and there were fresh scratches on the wall. We had a small terrier mix at the time, but there was no way she could have moved the bikes. To this day, we still don't know what caused that. I put that incident behind me and went on with my childhood, but another strange event happened the summer before I started 6th grade. I was sitting on the floor, playing on our PlayStation. My sister was in the bathroom getting ready for work, and my mom was cleaning the kitchen. Just as I delivered the final blow in the game, one of my sister's volleyball plaques flew off the wall, 4 feet across the room, and landed right next to me. Terrified, I screamed for my family and bolted out of the room. Even though I was scared, I couldn't help but laugh a little. It was my first real encounter. We measured the distance the plaque had flown and hung it back up, but I couldn't wait to tell my friends at school about it. There was also something strange about the tiny room that used to belong to my brothers. When my sister started sleeping there, she kept having nightmares whenever she slept facing away from the window. But when she turned to sleep facing the window, the nightmares stopped, and she could finally sleep through the night. Since then, nothing major has happened, but I still catch glimpses of the man in the white t-shirt out of the corner of my eye. The most significant thing now is our new dog. After our old dog passed away about a year after the plaque incident, we got another dog, and he has this habit of growling at a particular spot in the living room. There's a full-length mirror near that spot, and my sister and I always assumed he was barking at his reflection. But when he growls, he's looking slightly off to the side, not at the mirror. Every time he does it, my sister and I get chills, but we leave it alone. We've lived in this house for 13 years now, and I've come to the conclusion that whatever entity is here seems pretty docile. But I still wonder, who or what is this entity, and why does it stay? I stumbled across this site while trying to learn more about ghosts. I've had experiences throughout my life where I see and hear things at random times, but I'm not sure if they're related to ghosts or if I'm just imagining things, or worse, if I'm insane. Either way, I can describe what's happened. It all began when I was a kid, just going down the stairs at home. Every night, I'd see this tall, frightening woman staring at me as I passed by. I'd be so freaked out that I'd run for my life, diving toward the kitchen. She was always there in the same spot, just watching night after night for several years. One day, I described this woman to my father, and to my surprise, he said I had perfectly described my deceased grandmother. She had passed away in our house and often stood in that very spot during family gatherings. I don't really believe in the supernatural, so I brushed it off as a strange coincidence. Normally, this story would fade away into childhood memories, but these visions, these apparitions, have continued to follow me. When I'm home alone, I still turn on the lights and sit on the couch, avoiding the dark and the feeling of being watched. In those moments, I sometimes hear things, brief bursts of sound that make me question whether I heard anything at all. Sometimes it's just unintelligible noise, Other times it's my name or even laughter. The chills it gives me are real, and I've grown to fear both night and day. These voices always come when I least expect them, when I'm relaxed and not thinking about anything in particular. The voices don't bother me as much as the visions, though. Those encounters still happen, even now. The strange thing is that I no longer hear the voices, but I keep seeing these people, figures that appear during the day or night. They don't speak to me, and half the time, they look so real I can't immediately tell that they aren't normal people. Over the years, I've come up with a set of observations about these figures. They either stare directly at you or refuse to make eye contact. They never seem to speak. They look just as real as anyone else, except for the unsettling way they behave, either staring or deliberately avoiding your gaze. They're everywhere when you're not looking for them, but nowhere when you actively try to find them. They never move from where they are. They stay in place, sitting in a car, standing in a corner, and they disappear when you try to pay closer attention. There are probably more patterns I've noticed, but I can't remember them all right now. For a long time, I was terrified of these people. Nothing's more unsettling than turning a corner and suddenly being face to face with one of them during a midnight trip to the bathroom or walk to my bedroom. I've had many encounters, but none have been life-changing, just creepy. The longest I've ever seen one of them was a girl who sat in a chair in my bedroom for an entire week. All she did was cry. She refused to look at me, and I didn't know how to communicate with her. Half of me wanted to talk to her, but the other half was scared that if she did look at me, it would be like something straight out of a horror movie. All these experiences happened in my hometown, but ever since I moved to UCLA, I haven't seen or heard anything. Maybe it's the large number of people, the distractions, or the fact that I'm older now. Either way, I'm relieved that I don't have any more surprises lurking around the corner. Beyond seeing and hearing things, I've had other strange experiences. I once visited a temple in China and was overwhelmed by a deep sadness. I almost lost consciousness as I walked into a room filled with ashes. It felt like there were people trapped in the corner, unable to move on, and I could feel their pain. It was unbearable. I've also had an experience where I slept in a room where an elderly woman had died. I woke up in the middle of the night, unable to move. I felt old, tired, and weak, like my heart was stopping. It was a surreal, half-dream state where I knew I was going to die if I couldn't call for help. I tried to scream, but my voice wasn't loud enough. Everything around me looked yellow, and then my heart stopped. When I woke up, I was in the same bed, my body aching, as if my heart had just started beating again. For a moment, I truly thought I was going to die. I'm sharing this because I'm confused. Am I insane? Am I imagining things? I don't fully believe in the paranormal, yet I've had these unusual experiences. To make things stranger, the women in my family have a history of seeing visions, often of the future. I'm not a woman, so I don't know if that applies to me, but their stories feel very real. I'm typing this so my best friend, who is sitting right next to me, knows how much she means to me before or if I move away. I'm not entirely sure if I will move, but I hope to stay with her for as long as I live. My name is Michael, and I'm 16 years old. It all started 4 years ago when I moved into this house. For the first couple of months, nothing unusual happened. I've always been fascinated by ghosts, watching shows like Celebrity Paranormal when I was 12. Sure, they'd scare me, but I could sleep just fine afterward. Then, one morning on a school day, I woke up to find my mom trying to open my locked door. That was strange, because I hadn't locked it the night before. Even stranger, my alarm clock was turned off. I couldn't remember turning it off, and I definitely couldn't explain how my door had been locked from the inside. I ignored it at first, but 2 days later something happened. It was 6 a.m., and I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom. My sister was in her room, and my parents were still asleep. As I was looking down at the sink, I suddenly saw something in the mirror. A young woman walked across the hallway. She was pale, almost glowing in the darkness, with long hair and an old-fashioned nightgown. She looked about 13 or 14 years old. The part that scared me the most was when her eyes met mine through the reflection. I spun around and ran down the hall, but when I looked around the corner, nothing. No one. I searched the living room, my room, and everywhere else, but there was no sign of her. It wasn't my sister. Her room is right next to the bathroom, and if it were my mom, I would have heard her door open. Plus, my mom's hair isn't that long, and she's much bigger than the figure I saw. Since that day, I've been sweating in bed at night, trying to sleep but too scared to move. The incident kept replaying in my head, making me stiff with fear, like a deer frozen in headlights. Sometimes, while watching TV, the small Mary statue on top of the TV would shift when I wasn't looking. I'd fix it, but every time I looked away, it would change position again. Long nights turned into weeks and weeks into months. I turned 13 and I slowly forgot about the experience until April 2007. It was April 1st, and I had become fascinated with ghosts again after buying a book about true ghost stories. It even had instructions on how to open your third eye, so I gave it a try. I told a new friend about my plan, and he just looked at me weird and said, "Good luck with that." I kept trying to open my third eye, but nothing happened. I eventually gave up, though my interest in ghosts remained. 2 days later, I was sitting on my bed, getting ready for school and listening to music. I started daydreaming, and as my vision blurred, I saw something next to me. A dark figure was sitting beside me. I looked up, surprised but not alarmed. My vision cleared, and I realized who it was. It was the girl from before. Pale skin, long hair, the same nightgown. This time, though, she didn't scare me. She was actually kind of cute. But when I looked back, she was gone. After that, I started talking to the ghost, though I could never hear her speak. I couldn't see her clearly most of the time, but I'd catch glimpses of shadows from the corner of my eye. I began feeling like someone special was waiting for me at home, and I started calling her Sam. She didn't seem to mind the name since she hadn't thrown anything at me yet. Even though it took some getting used to having a ghost watching my every move, Sam proved to be harmless. I could tell when she was sitting next to me because of the soft, cool air she gave off, like a gentle breath. Whenever I left the house, I'd say goodbye to Sam, and when I came home, I'd greet her. There was always a pleasant feeling when she was around, like everything just clicked into place. Over time, I realized I might have a crush on her. It took me weeks to admit it, but when I finally did, I felt a soft breeze on my face. I wasn't sure what that meant, but I liked to think she felt the same. There were nights when Sam would lie next to me as I slept, and when I woke up, I could still feel her presence. One time, after a fight with my mom, I went to my room to cool off. A few minutes later, I heard my mom screaming in the basement. I rushed down to find her yelling at nothing. She said the lights were turning on and off by themselves. I later realized that Sam had been trying to scare her. I appreciated her having my back, but I asked her not to do that again. On our 1-year anniversary, we watched movies together, and I talked to her late into the night. I told her how much she meant to me. During our conversation, the air around me grew colder than it ever had before, almost like being outside in the winter. It never gets that cold in my room, so I knew it was something special. Over the years, I've realized that when people die, they either cross over or remain as ghosts, tied to the earth. Some, like Sam, are trapped in certain places. Ghosts try to interact with us, but we often get scared and assume they're trying to hurt us. Many ghosts give up and accept their loneliness, but I don't believe they're meant to be feared. They're meant to be understood. Sam has taught me valuable lessons, even though she's never said a word. She's the greatest friend I could ever ask for. As I prepare for the possibility of moving or going to college, I'll cherish the time we've spent together. And who knows, maybe after my last breath, I can spend eternity with her. As some of you may know, I'm a bartender by trade. I usually work during the day, which gives me my nights free to do whatever I want. When I first started bartending, not only did I learn how to mix drinks, but I also learned how to hold my liquor. Ironically, I'm not as good at that anymore. My boss at the time gave me a piece of advice. Never refuse a drink. Customers don't like drinking alone, and if someone offers to buy you one, take it. Otherwise, they'll get offended, close their tab, and head to the next bar where the bartender will drink with them. Long story short, I got good at taking shots instead of sipping on full drinks. Shots were quick, over in a second, and I could go back to work right away. Tequila became my go-to, Patron or Casseters, preferably. After about 9 months of bartending, I could take up to 8 shots during a 7-hour shift. Yes, I'd be drunk as a skunk, but the cash register would always balance at the end of the night. People got their drinks made correctly, and food orders came out right and on time. I quickly learned that 9 shots were my limit, anything more, and things would fall apart. Since I worked during the day, by 6 o'clock, I was free to clock out and get the party started elsewhere. One particular day, the party was at Tequila Jack's in Long Beach, California, a waterfront bar that offers over 100 types of tequila. My kind of place. It was around 7 p.m., and the sun was setting over the marina. I just arrived at Tequila Jack's, still buzzing from my shift but starting to sober up. I wandered out to the smoking patio, which overlooked the water, and found a spot at the wooden counter. As I stared out at the marina, I set my purse down, pulled out a cigarette, and lit up. I noticed a glass ashtray sitting about 10 inches to my left and pulled it in front of me, preparing to relax. And then things got weird. As soon as I slid the ashtray toward me, it slid right back to where it had been. In my slightly drunk state, it didn't fully register as strange. I just found it a little annoying. So I pulled it back again. And again, it slid away. By the 3rd time this happened, I was starting to get a little frustrated. But that's when I heard a voice. "Did you do that?" A man asked from my right. I turned around to see who was speaking. "Did I do what?" I asked, looking at the well-dressed man beside me. He looked about 40, wearing business casual clothes like he'd just gotten off work. A complete stranger. "That ashtray, it just moved without you touching it. I watched it. Did you do that?" He asked again. I glanced at the ashtray. Had he not said anything, I probably wouldn't have thought much of it. But now, with someone else noticing, I was confused. "No, I didn't move the ashtray," I said, smiling nervously. In my tequila-fueled brain, I thought maybe he was playing a joke on me, like one of those hidden camera pranks. But when I pulled the ashtray toward me again, it slid away, and this time I noticed the man's face. His alarmed expression had quickly turned to fear. "Are you some kind of witch?" he yelled. Now, I may have been a bit tipsy and slow on the uptake, but I knew one thing for sure. I was not a witch. "I'm not a witch, and I didn't move the ashtray," I snapped back. "How do I know you aren't the one doing it?" He stared at me like I'd just grown 2 heads. "I don't know what's going on, but I'm getting the hell out of here," he said, turning on his heel and walking back inside. I stood there, staring at the ashtray, feeling the tequila buzz kick in again. Maybe I can move things, I thought to myself. Maybe that guy was right, and I'm just some kind of witch who doesn't know it yet. I glanced around, feeling a little braver now that the idea had taken hold. "Move!" I quietly ordered the ashtray. Nothing happened. I felt around under the counter, searching for some hidden mechanism or magnet that could be causing it to move. There was nothing. "Move!" I said again. Still nothing. I picked up the ashtray, placed it in front of me, and watched as it slowly slid away on its own again. That's when it hit me, whatever was happening, it had nothing to do with me. This was something outside of my control, and it had just scared a complete stranger away. "I think I'm getting out of here, too," I muttered to myself, stubbing out my cigarette in a different ashtray on my way back inside. First off, I want to say that I've had many ghostly experiences, and I've always been open-minded about the paranormal. I'm also a Christian and believe in heaven and hell, and along with these experiences, I've also had encounters with what I believe are demonic forces. I live in an area people call Gold Country, where gold was first discovered in America, around Coloma, California. I'm only about 25 minutes away from a historic place called Hangtown, Placerville, California, which is famous for its history, especially the haunted Carey House Hotel. I've heard many ghost stories about that hotel, and it's even listed as one of the most haunted hotels in California. So, as you can imagine, I live in a county filled with old buildings and ghost sightings, and being sensitive to the supernatural, I can always sense when something is present. It's hard to explain, but when I walk into a really old place, like the Carey House Hotel, I get the strange feeling like I'm not alone. It's like something is watching me. There are also times I just know things without being told. For example, I once visited a historic house in my town. As soon as I walked in, I felt an overwhelming sense that someone had died right where I was standing. I didn't know why I felt that way, but I knew there was something still lingering in that spot. I talked to the woman at the front desk. The house had been turned into a little store, and she explained that back in 1809, the wife of the man who built the house fell down those very stairs while pregnant with their first child. Tragically, both she and the baby died. The woman also mentioned that the rocking chair in the corner sometimes moves on its own, and she often hears a woman singing upstairs. That gave me chills because it confirmed what I had felt. That was the moment I realized I might be a little different. The first time I actually saw a ghost was when I was 16. I'm 20 now. I was home alone, making lunch in the kitchen. There's a big window in the kitchen that overlooks the front porch, and I could see my dog sitting outside, watching me through the glass. As I was talking to a friend on the phone, I walked past the window again and glanced at my dog. That's when it happened. There, standing next to my dog, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 3 or 4 years old, with long dark brown hair, wearing a white lacy dress or nightgown. She had her hand resting on my dog's head, watching me through the window. I froze. She looked like something from another time, maybe the mid-1800s, though I'm not entirely sure. My heart started racing. I dropped the phone in shock, and when I quickly looked down to pick it up, the line disconnected. When I looked back up, the girl was gone. My dog was still sitting there, happily wagging her tail like nothing had happened. I've always wondered if my dog knew the little girl was there. I've heard that animals can sense spirits, so maybe she was aware of the ghost and didn't mind her presence. If anyone has insight into animals and the paranormal, I'd love to hear it. I was left with so many questions. Was the girl connected to our property somehow, even though our house was only about 8 years old? Or was she just visiting because she liked my dog? I still wonder if she's ever around now. When I told my mom, she didn't believe me. No surprise there. She only believes in heaven and hell, no in-between, so she told me it was probably a demon. But I know what I saw, and I've seen demons before. This was not a demon. My dad, on the other hand, believed me. He said, "Well, when I'm mowing the yard or working outside, I'll keep an eye out for her." He understood because he has his own ghost stories, but we both agreed that these things happen when you least expect them. I still wish I could see her again, especially now that I'm not as afraid of the paranormal and more open to it. I'd love to know more about her name, where she's from, or what time period she lived in. I've lived in the small town of Tulare, California, my entire life. Between the two houses I've called home, I've experienced many things that could be classified as paranormal. My family is somewhat religious. We don't attend church regularly, but we are of the Christian faith. There's only one other person in my house who believes in the paranormal, and she's never doubted anything I've told her. When I was very young, too young to remember, my parents told me I had horrible night terrors. They would hear me screaming and come to check on me, only to find me terrified of snakes in the corner of my room or people outside. Of course, these things weren't real and were apparently part of my dreams. My first memory of a paranormal encounter happened the day after my grandmother passed away. I was sleeping in my parents' bed, as I often did because I was afraid of the dark. I woke up in the middle of the night, and as I turned to go back to sleep, I saw my grandmother. She was glowing with a yellowish-white light, as if projected from an old movie. She was standing by my mother's dresser, sorting through papers. I was scared, so I buried my head in the pillow and eventually fell back asleep. The second encounter happened about a year later, still in the same house. I was sleeping in the room I shared with my brother. He liked to sleep with his radio on, an old receiver with an orange backlight. One night, I woke up because of a cold breeze on my face, which wasn't unusual in that old drafty house. But when I opened my eyes, I saw a dull white blur move out of the corner of my vision. The room was still after that. Just as I was calming down, the power to my brother's radio suddenly switched off. Startled, I hid under the covers. After a few minutes, I peeked out, but nothing else happened that night. Around this time, I started having recurring nightmares about people with red eyes. They would either be looking into my bedroom window or standing in the hallway, watching me from a distance. One dream, in particular, scared me awake. There was a tall, dark figure in a robe with glowing red eyes, standing in a hallway we called the breezeway. Things were quiet for a while after that, until my entire family started hearing loud pounding noises at night. It sounded like someone was running full speed and slamming into doors. We didn't think much of it, just another odd noise from the old house. But it frightened me nonetheless. At a friend's birthday party who lived on the same street, I had another strange experience. It was sometime between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m., and I was the only one awake, playing Super Nintendo while everyone else was asleep in the living room. Suddenly, I heard banging sounds coming from the kitchen, like pots being knocked around. I assumed it was his cat messing around. His mom came out right after the noise, asking what I was doing. I told her I was just playing games, and she went to check the kitchen. All the cabinet doors were wide open. That was my only paranormal experience outside of my own home. When I was 11, we moved to another house across town, and things were calm at first. But by the time I was 13 or 14, I started sleepwalking again. I would wake up in strange places, like the front door, staring out into the darkness. I don't remember dreaming during these episodes, but I was always frightened when I woke up standing in a dark room for no reason. A few years ago, we took a fishing trip to Pismo Beach, staying at a trailer park home that belonged to my friend's grandmother, who had recently passed away. I slept in the living room on a cot, while my two friends shared the pull-out bed. I had trouble sleeping as usual and kept hearing a ticking sound every 10 seconds. I thought it was something outside, as it was windy, so I ignored it. But suddenly, I heard a loud screeching/static sound, as if it was coming from a speaker at full volume. It was coming from the record player in the living room. The noise was so loud that I covered my ears, but strangely, no one else woke up. Not even my father, who's a light sleeper. I ran over to the record player, but turning the switch didn't stop the noise. I finally pulled out the speaker wire, and the noise stopped. To this day, I have no idea what caused it. No one else in the house heard it, which I still can't believe given how loud it was. Everything was fine for a while after that, until June of this year. I had a nightmare where I was looking into the bathroom mirror, and as I got closer, my reflection changed into a horrifying girl with solid black eyes glaring at me. I woke up, but I was paralyzed, classic sleep paralysis. It wasn't my first time experiencing it, but this was definitely the scariest. As I tried to move, I noticed a black-robed figure standing next to the bed, watching me. I couldn't see its face, but I had the strong sense that it was female. Oddly enough, I wasn't scared. I was furious. I shut my eyes tightly, and when I woke up again, it was morning. The fear and anger were gone. After some research, I found out that what I saw was likely a shadow figure. I'd never heard of them before, but the description of the robed figure matched perfectly. Since that night, I've had sleep paralysis a few more times, but no other nightmares. Still, I can't sleep in the dark anymore. If I do, I get this sinking feeling, like something's there, even though I know I'm alone. Sleeping with the TV on helps, but I can't shake the feeling that someone's watching me from afar, especially when I'm alone in the house. My mother has had her own experiences too. She's told me about her occasional sleep paralysis, where she hears two people whispering. She's also had dreams about seeing the gates of hell in our living room, though I chalk that up to just another unsettling dream. I can't help but wonder if all of these experiences are connected, like something has been following me from my childhood home. It's strange how these occurrences happen for a while, then stop for years only to start up again. Could it just be an overactive imagination? I'm 22 years old now, and I shouldn't have to sleep with the TV on. As many of you know, I've lived in the same house I grew up in as a child. I'm now 29, and I live here with my mother and my husband. This house originally belonged to my grandmother, who passed away when I was 11 years old. Other than a strange incident where I saw my mother's doppelganger in the bathroom mirror, my experiences here have been relatively minor while my grandmother was still alive. When I was little, I used to sleep with my nana in the master bedroom. One night, I remember lying on my stomach, upset about something, when I felt someone rubbing my back. The touch was so soothing, like my nana's comforting hand, but she wasn't in the room at the time. When I told her about it, she smiled and said, "That was an angel sent by God to comfort you." It was a comforting experience, one that stuck with me. Another odd occurrence happened every night when I was in bed. I would see a white light, about the size of a baseball, spinning rapidly behind my eyelids. At first, I thought it was some kind of eye issue, but one night, I decided to open my eyes, and the light was still there, spinning around the room. It was fast, almost too fast to follow. The next day, I asked my Nana if she had ever seen it. She had, but she told me she just kept her eyes shut and ignored it, advising me to do the same. The light continued to appear for about 8 months, illuminating the room slightly, before it suddenly disappeared one night and never returned. My family is Catholic, and while we believe in paranormal occurrences, we prefer not to acknowledge them. That was the last strange thing that happened in the house until my early 20s. By then, it was just my mother and me living in the house, and we both liked staying up late, watching TV together in the living room until the early hours of the morning, sometimes as late as 4 or 5 a.m. On several occasions, after we had gone to bed, I would hear the TV or low, mumbling voices coming from the living room. Thinking my mom had gotten back up, I would go check, only to find the house dark and my mom sound asleep in her room. The strangest part was hearing a man and woman talking in muffled voices. Sometimes, I could even hear an audience laughing, like someone was watching a comedy show. One night, I clearly heard the woman's voice rise, as if she was asking a question. Though I could never make out the words, the voices sounded calm, not hostile or alarming. Occasionally, I heard just the man, other times both. It was unsettling, but the voices weren't threatening. I assumed it was some sort of residual energy, maybe from the TV, but I wasn't entirely sure. When I mentioned the mumbling to my mom, she simply smiled and said, "Why do you think I keep the fan on in my room all the time?" That was enough for me to realize I wasn't imagining things. After my husband moved in, the strange occurrences became less frequent, and after we got married, they stopped completely. I've often wondered if it was because there was now another man in the house. The last strange event happened a little over a year ago. My husband and I had argued, and he went to bed angry. My mom was in her room, and I stayed up late, browsing online in the living room. The front door of our house has a black security door, and beyond that, a wooden door. We left the wooden door open to let in the cool summer air, but the security door was locked. Suddenly, I heard the security door slam so hard that I screamed, thinking someone had broken into the house. My mom rushed out of her room, and our dog, Phoebe, started barking. I was frozen with fear, laptop in hand, ready to use it as a weapon if needed. My mom bravely went to check the porch, but found nothing out of place. The security door was still locked, and her conclusion was that maybe a neighborhood cat had bumped into it. But I knew that slam was way too loud to have been caused by an animal. It sounded like someone had violently slammed the door shut. I checked on my husband, hoping he was playing a prank, but he was sound asleep the entire time. I've read enough to know that family arguments can stir up paranormal activity, but this has never happened before or since. Now, I live in the same house my grandparents purchased brand new in 1960. The only unsettling part of the house for me is the first bathroom. It all started when I was just 4 years old, living in Colorado. From a young age, I always felt uneasy going into the basement of our home. It wasn't just a childhood fear of dark places. It felt like something was watching or following me. The basement had 3 bedrooms and a storage room, but despite its size, it always left me with an unsettling feeling. One of the earliest experiences I remember is waking up in the morning and going outside to play. When I would look up at my older brother's bedroom window, I would see a man staring at me. His face is still engraved in my memory. Dark eyes with circles beneath them, long stringy hair, a square face that looked almost native, and dark, dirty-looking skin. This man became a recurring figure for me. One time, I got locked in the basement, and as I sat on the top stair, I saw a dark, cloud-like shape slowly moving toward me. Its dark eyes were fixed on me, and I couldn't move. Just before it reached me, my dad heard me scream and unlocked the door, letting me out. I was about 9 years old when my parents decided to move us to California, hoping for a fresh start. I was relieved, thinking that by leaving Colorado, I would leave that strange man behind. But I was wrong. For several years after the move to Fresno, nothing major happened. Just occasional sightings of animals that weren't there or flashes of white in the corner of my eye, like someone walking by. It wasn't until I turned 18 that things took a darker turn. I had moved into a 3-bedroom apartment with my dog, and everything seemed fine at first. But soon, I'd come home from work to find the garage light or the PlayStation on, even though I knew I hadn't touched them. My dog refused to go into the room across from my bedroom, staring at it intently and only going in if I did. Then, one night while I was asleep with a night light on, I saw a little girl standing next to my bed. She was at arm's length, staring at me with no expression. I closed my eyes and counted to 10 twice, hoping she would disappear. When I opened them again, she was gone. After I met my husband, we lived together in the same apartment. One night, as we were playing cards, we heard a loud noise. My golf shoes, still in their box, had somehow been thrown out of the closet and landed by the bed. Pictures would fall off the walls in the middle of the night. We even tried to bless the apartment together, but something wouldn't let me speak. I asked my husband to do it while I was at work the next day, and things felt calmer for a while. But soon after, it got worse. Our youngest son started hearing a baby crying, even though none of our neighbors had young children. Items would still fall from the closet, and the tension in the house felt heavy. Eventually, we moved into a house, thinking things might improve. One day, I tried to close the laundry room door, but it felt like someone was holding it open from the other side. I thought my husband was playing a joke, but when I finally managed to close it, I found him sitting in the living room, watching a baseball game. When I told him what had happened, he went to check and challenged whatever it was, telling it to mess with him, not his wife or kids. Over time, I've seen orbs flying across rooms, coming straight toward my head. I've seen spirits, heard them, and felt their presence. I've never dared to ask them what they want. Seeing and hearing is more than enough for me. To this day, I refuse to go into basements or cellars. I can't sleep in the dark unless my husband is next to me, and even then, I still feel uneasy when I'm alone at home. From seeing shadowy figures at the foot of my bed to hearing whispers, these experiences have followed me from the age of 4 and continue to this day. First off, I'd like to say hello to all the readers here. I really enjoy reading the helpful advice in the comments, and I'm hoping to get some insight into my own experiences. I'm not a stranger to the paranormal. As a child, I had plenty of scary encounters that made me a true believer for life. Recently, my mother and I have been noticing some strange things happening around our apartment. It started about 3 months ago, after my younger brother left home on bad terms. My mom and I miss him terribly. Since then, I've been staying in his old room, and from the first night I noticed how cold the room was. I didn't think much of it at first because we've been living in this apartment for 4 years without any incidents. But something else started happening. Every night, I would wake up around 3 o'clock or 3:30 a.m. without fail. It wasn't like I woke up scared or sensed anything out of the ordinary, but I couldn't fall back to sleep for at least an hour after waking. This went on for about a month. Then one night, I came home from work, and as I walked into my room, I saw the door move by itself. I couldn't believe what I had just seen. But after that, nothing else happened that night. It was calm, quiet, like usual. A couple of weeks later, my mother and I were having breakfast when the fan over the stove turned on all by itself. My mom thought it was funny and just laughed, but no matter how many times she pushed the off button, it wouldn't stop. In fact, it only got louder. After a while, she gave up, sat back down, and then the fan suddenly turned off by itself. I tried to tell her about the strange things I'd noticed in my brother's old room, but she just laughed and said I had a wild imagination. My mother has never believed in the paranormal and always thinks I'm just letting my imagination run wild. But then a few days later, my aunt came over, and we were discussing new places we were looking to move to. Out of nowhere, the television in my mother's room turned on by itself. My aunt gets scared easily, so naturally, she was creeped out, and to be honest, I was too. But my mom, of course, just thought it was hilarious. She went into the room, laughing, saying that the ghost was going to come and get her. She turned the TV off and left the room, but as soon as she walked out, the TV turned back on again. She still wasn't fazed and brushed it off like it was nothing. A week later, my boyfriend stayed over, and when I woke up early to go for a run, everything seemed normal. But when I got back, I found my boyfriend sitting on my bed with an odd look on his face. When I asked him what was wrong, he told me that while I was gone, he felt someone tap his arm. At first, he thought it was me, but when he turned around, he saw someone with a striped shirt walk by, except they had no head and were transparent. Both of us were creeped out, so we told my mom. She finally admitted that 2 nights before, she kept hearing a boy screaming in the middle of the night. I then told her that I had been hearing whispers in my ear just as I was about to fall asleep. The hallway in my 1920s apartment in Los Angeles was more than just unsettling. Every time I was in the living room watching TV, I'd find myself glancing over at it, expecting to see something or someone standing there. I wasn't alone in this feeling. Everyone who visited, especially during parties, would hurry through that long hallway as fast as they could, even avoiding waiting there when the bathroom was occupied. I only used the linen closet in the hallway to store things I rarely needed because I hated going into that space. Even my dog would sometimes sit and whimper while staring at the hallway, as if he could sense something that I couldn't see. And then there were the dreams. It started with occasional nightmares about a tall shadow figure standing in the doorway of my bedroom. They were unsettling but infrequent at first. Over time, the dreams became more regular. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, struggling to catch my breath. But I never mentioned these nightmares to my husband or anyone else. Then came the dream. That night seemed like any other. My husband and I went to bed at our usual time. He slept closest to the bedroom door, just a few feet away. But the dream I had that night felt different, more vivid. Everything in the dream was exactly as it was in reality. The same bed, the same pajamas, the same day, the same temperature. Felt more like a trance than a dream. In the dream, I woke up and propped myself up on my left elbow, looking at the alarm clock. It was 1:45 a.m. I glanced at the doorway, then lay back down. But every 15 minutes or so, I would wake up again, look at the clock, glance at the doorway, and then fall back to sleep. This happened at 2 a.m., 2:15 a.m., 2:30 a.m., and so on. But something changed in the last cycle. When I woke up again, everything felt different, more intense. The air felt heavier. I propped myself up and checked the clock. It was either 3:31 or 3:13 a.m. I knew then that what I had been waiting for had arrived. I was terrified, but I couldn't stop myself from looking at the doorway. And there it was, a tall, featureless, pitch-black shadow man. I woke up for real this time, heart pounding, and found myself still propped up on my elbow, staring at the exact spot in the doorway where the shadow man had been in my dream. I woke my husband immediately, too afraid to sleep, because even though the dream was over, I could still feel its presence lingering in the room. After that, the presence became undeniable. I woke up many nights to something saying my name in a loud whisper, sometimes from across the room, sometimes right next to my ear. I avoided using the bathroom at night, terrified that if I put my feet on the floor, something would reach out and touch me. On some nights, I'd lie in bed and feel an overwhelming weight on my body, like I was paralyzed. I even found myself freezing in bed during the summer, in an unair-conditioned apartment. Then I finally shared what was happening. My husband and I had some friends over for dinner one night, and the conversation turned to ghost stories. That's when I finally told them about the shadow man. My husband sat in stunned silence. Turns out, he had been having dreams about the exact same shadow man standing in our bedroom doorway. He just never mentioned it to me. Eventually, we moved out of that apartment. In our new place, we still had a few strange occurrences, like a chair that would mysteriously move to the same spot over and over again, and our downstairs neighbor reporting footsteps in the middle of the night. But it didn't feel threatening, and we could easily blame it on the cats. We've since moved again, this time into our first home, and I'm happy to report that there's been no sign of any shadowy figures. At least, not yet. I moved to Los Angeles in 2000 to be with my boyfriend, Eric. He was living in a small, overpriced one-bedroom apartment in Studio City, and we quickly decided to find something cheaper and bigger. One day, we came across a cute place in Sherman Oaks, a one-bedroom, one-bath unit built in the 1920s, with charming built-in cabinets in the dining room and tons of character. The rent was only $600 a month, which was a steal for the area. But from the moment we walked in, Eric said he didn't like the place. He refused to even look at the rest of the apartment, adamantly saying he would never live there. Fast forward 6 months, and Eric and I were over. He had a drinking problem, and our relationship had become toxic. We'd moved to Woodland Hills, far from the city, and the long drives into town were exhausting, just like our relationship. I managed to get out of the lease because of his drinking and started looking for a place of my own. With a tight budget, I asked around at work, and my supervisor, June, mentioned that she owned a building in Sherman Oaks. She told me a one-bedroom unit was available for $625 a month. When she gave me the address, I was shocked. It was the same apartment Eric and I had seen 6 months earlier. I moved in, not realizing at the time that either the apartment had sat empty for 6 months or someone had broken the lease. The first year was uneventful. I was hardly ever home, traveling down to San Diego every other weekend to work as a go-go dancer at Clubs Ultra and on Broadway. The weekends I wasn't in San Diego, my daughter Sierra would come down from Fresno to spend time with me. It wasn't until about a year later, when I started staying home more, that things started to get strange. The first incident was a big one. I was on the phone with a guy I was dating, in the middle of the day, when 2 framed pictures on the dining room wall suddenly flew off. These weren't just hanging by a single nail. They had 2 nails and alligator hooks to hold them securely in place. I immediately thought we'd had an earthquake, but nothing else was moving. I checked the pictures and found that the nails were still firmly in the wall, and the hooks were intact. I tried to make the pictures fall off the wall, but no matter what I did, I couldn't recreate what had happened. It was perplexing, but I brushed it off. A week later, I came home at night, and as I reached for the knob on the floor lamp, the light switched on by itself. Again, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a wiring issue, or I'd stepped on a loose floorboard that jarred the bulb. But small, unexplainable things kept happening. My bedroom TV remote disappeared and never resurfaced, not even when I moved out. My hairbrush vanished, never to be seen again. Little things like that, easy to dismiss but adding up. Then things escalated. It was Christmas, and I had bought Sierra a Cinderella castle from KB Toys. It lit up, played music, and had little figurines of Cinderella and Prince Charming dancing. The package arrived late one night, so I set it at the foot of my bed and went to sleep. Around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of loud music and flashing lights. The castle was going off on its own. I couldn't get it to stop, so I moved it to the kitchen, closed all the doors, and tried to ignore it. The next morning, I checked it and everything seemed fine, so I assumed it was a wiring issue from shipping. On Christmas morning, Sierra was thrilled when she unwrapped the castle. I proudly told her, "Look what it does," and pressed the button to turn it on. Nothing happened. That's when she pointed to the box and said, "Mommy, look, it says, for AA batteries required." A chill ran down my spine. I realized the castle had been playing all night, without any batteries. Not long after, Sierra had a terrifying experience of her own. I put her to bed one night, and not long after, she screamed for me. I ran into her room, and she was pale, almost ghostly white. She said, "Mommy, the old lady pulled my blankets off me." Sure enough, her blankets were piled on the floor at the foot of her bed. I didn't believe her at the time and scolded her for making up stories, something I deeply regret now. That summer, strange things became more frequent. My friends Gina and Ashley came over one evening, and I told Gina about the weird things that had been happening. To my surprise, she didn't laugh. She said she had experienced odd things while babysitting at my place before. Ashley, who knew nothing of the incidents, went to use the bathroom and came back out, visibly shaken. She said, "There's something off about your hallway. There's a bad energy in there." We were all spooked. The final straw came one night when I was home alone. I went to bed around 2 a.m. and, for some reason, decided to close both the hallway door and my bedroom door, something I didn't normally do. I began praying out loud for my daughter when I heard banging sounds. At first, I thought it was my upstairs neighbor, but the noise grew louder and seemed to come from my bedroom door. The door began shaking violently, as if someone was trying to break in. I was frozen in fear. When I finally worked up the courage to open the door, every light in the house was on. My TV, my stereo, my computer, everything. The windows were rattling. I screamed for it to stop, and then there was a knock at the door. It was my manager. She asked if I was okay, and then casually mentioned, "I thought you weren't having any of the problems Carlos had." Carlos, the previous tenant, had fled in the middle of the night, claiming the apartment was haunted. He broke his lease just 5 months in. I stayed at my boyfriend's place that night, and the next day, I told my boss at work what had happened. He didn't think I was crazy. He said his wife could help me. She came over, gave me sage and salt water, and told me to take my house back. I felt silly, but I did it. It worked. I stayed another 8 months until my fiancé and I moved to West Hollywood. Later, I looked up the apartment's history. There had been 2 deaths. An elderly woman who died of natural causes, the one who pulled Sierra's blankets, and a young man who had committed suicide in the detached garage. I'll never forget that place. I've since learned that my daughter had many more experiences she didn't tell me about at the time. She didn't want to scare me. She was only 5 to 8 years old, and she was protecting me. I still feel bad that I didn't believe her that night, but I definitely got my own share of scares in the end. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Before my time, sensitivity to the paranormal ran down my father's side of the family. No one on my mother's side ever displayed any sensitivity. In fact, my mom's family seemed to repel paranormal activity, especially my gramps. He had an extraordinary presence, strong, bold, and completely unafraid. He did things that would terrify most people. Visiting graveyards at midnight, provoking spirits, demons, or whatever you'd like to call them, using Ouija boards. He even spent nights there, but nothing ever happened. He was formerly sensitive to spirits as a child, plagued by nightmares of being tormented and chased by them. But as he grew older, the tables turned. He began having dreams where he was the one chasing them down, stabbing them, laughing maniacally. The dreams and the manifestations stopped. My dad's side of the family, however, is like a magnet for the paranormal. This ability or curse was passed on to me. I just pray my younger siblings don't inherit it. My dad always said I was the special one, acknowledging that I shared the same ability but at a much stronger level. He comforted me through the experiences, even when it felt like my faith was being shattered. My soul burned. But let me take you back to how it all started for me. I was around 6 or 7 when the strange experiences began. Every night, systematically, I'd wake up at 3 a.m., leave my parents' bed, and feel compelled to sit in the hallway under a tiny light. I'd sit there, staring into the darkness. At first, it was just movement, shadows, but eventually I saw shapes. Over time, they became solid, detailed. I could even hear things, although I couldn't make out the words. I was paralyzed with fear, but still went out there every night, for reasons I couldn't explain. This continued until we moved when I was around 10. Our new home was supposed to be a fresh start. My grandpa always told me there was nothing to be afraid of in this house. Our old house, though, was different. He explained that the previous owner had committed suicide under immense stress. His wife had been cheating on him. My family was fleeing Vietnam at the time, and this man had taken them in when they had nowhere to go. I'd never met him. He passed away before I was born. But my grandpa showed me an old photograph. In it, a happy-looking man cradled a baby wrapped in a blanket. That baby was me. To this day, I wonder if he was the one trying to communicate with me. But the new house didn't bring peace. I started seeing faces in mirrors. Rotting, decaying faces with flesh barely hanging on, blood running down, and twisted, grimacing expressions. Every time I saw them, I'd run to wherever my family was and stay close until they went upstairs to bed. Coming home from school was the worst. I'd be alone, and that's when the figures would appear. I could feel breathing on my neck, hear whispers, and sometimes feel hands gripping me tightly, holding me in place. One night, everything reached a terrifying peak. I was in bed trying to sleep. The lights flickered, and I heard footsteps and whispers getting closer. I bolted for my parents' room, but the fear only intensified. My parents tried to comfort me, but they couldn't hear or see what I was experiencing. What shocked me the most was that my dad, usually sensitive to these things, didn't sense anything. As I lay in their bed, dresses in my mom's closet began to rattle. Shadowy legs sprouted from them, and they slithered like snakes. Green, glowing eyes appeared on the walls, the floor, everywhere. Voices surrounded me, hurling threats of death and abandonment. At that moment, I felt utterly hopeless, consumed by fear. But suddenly, something shifted inside me. My face contorted into a grimace, and I was filled with a primal rage. I don't know where it came from, but it was enough to make everything stop. The entities left me alone for a few years after that. Recently, though, now that I'm 15, it's all coming back. It started the same way, whispers, fleeting glimpses of figures in my peripheral vision. But the most confusing part came in a dream. In the dream, I was in a blank, endless space, pure white, like a room without walls. A tall, slender elderly man appeared, and he seemed familiar, though I couldn't place him. He told me, "I've waited so long, Devin. Now that you're here, I can give you what's rightfully yours, a gift." He placed his hands on my head, and an excruciating burning sensation shot through my entire body. I screamed in both the dream and reality. When I woke up, my head was pounding. I rushed to the bathroom and almost fainted when I saw a pair of handprints, imprinted in dried blood, on my head. I frantically washed them off, but there wasn't a single scratch on me. I still felt the burning sensation. When I described the man to my family, my grandma started crying. I had perfectly described my great-grandfather. In the past week, things have escalated. I've developed what feels like a seventh sense, something I can turn on and off at will. When I activate it, I can see auras around people, each one unique to the person. But when I look at myself, I don't have an aura. I'm confused by what this ability means, but even stranger, I've noticed that I'm growing stronger, physically and mentally. I've even started frightening the entities that once terrified me. Just yesterday, I woke up to find a detailed figure standing in my room. It had human-like skin and an evil grimace, its posture radiating aggression. But I didn't feel fear. Instead, I was filled with anger. I shouted at it, threatened it, and its expression changed from one of menace to fear. Then it vanished. I'm left wondering, what do these chain of events mean? What's happening to me? For the past few weeks, I haven't been getting much sleep. It all started a while ago, and at first I didn't think much of it. Ghosts or hauntings weren't the first things that came to mind. I usually tell myself it's just your imagination. But lately, I've been wondering if it's more than that. Someone once told me that your instincts are usually right, and you should trust them. Now I'm starting to think they might have been right. It started with me waking up in the middle of the night. I don't know if it's at the same time every night, but I'll try to keep track from now on. Every time I wake up, I get this feeling, like something is at the foot of my bed, which is near the corner of my room. It's hard to describe, but this overwhelming sense of fear washes over me. My instincts scream, "Protect yourself." I try not to look directly at that corner, but I can't help glancing at it. I feel like something is watching me from the shadows. I try to force myself back to sleep, telling myself it's nothing, but the feeling doesn't go away. At first, I brushed it off as my imagination. It seemed childish, and as a college student, I didn't want to let something like this bother me. But it kept happening, sporadically, but often enough to unsettle me. I kept telling myself it was nothing. It wasn't until my mom told me something disturbing that I started to worry. One morning, she said to me, "Last night, your dad got up, stomping around in the kitchen. I asked him what he was doing, and he said he saw this black shadowy figure heading towards your room. He thought it was someone breaking into the house, but then it just disappeared. My mom continued, "You know your dad doesn't believe in that stuff, but he didn't want to scare you." That's when I realized something might really be going on. I forgot to mention that the night this happened, I had a terrible dream. It was dark, filled with death and strange things I don't normally think about in my day-to-day life. I'm a pretty happy person. I love cute things like flowers and girly stuff, so waking up from a dream like that left me disturbed. What's more unsettling is that it was the same night my dad saw the shadow enter my room. A few days later, things got even stranger. My dad had deep scratch marks on his stomach. He blamed the cat, but our cat has never scratched like that before. The scratches were long, deep, and more kept appearing on his body. To me, it felt like the shadow was retaliating against him for challenging it. My mom thought the same, though my dad refused to believe it. He doesn't believe in ghosts or the paranormal, but even he seemed a little uneasy after my mom told him not to challenge whatever it was. Thankfully, the scratches are healing now, and no new ones have appeared. Last night, I felt it watching me again. This presence felt stronger, and I was filled with fear. I remember hearing that if you don't give these things too much attention, they'll eventually go away. I'm hoping that's true because now I'm worried. Not just for me, but for my younger sibling. My mom told me that last week, my brother saw a white figure walking around. He was looking straight at it while my parents were in their room watching TV. My brother has never mentioned seeing anything paranormal before, so this was the first time he ever claimed to have seen something like that. Now, he's a little scared, but he's trying not to think about it. The part that worries me most is that this is a new house. I don't want it to turn out like our old place, which was truly haunted. I've been dealing with paranormal encounters since I was little, but this thing watching me at night feels different. It feels like it wants to hurt me, and that's what scares me the most. First of all, thank you for taking the time to read my experience. I'm new to this website and have many questions about my experiences, hoping that you can help me make sense of them. I'm not used to anything paranormal, and I don't claim to have psychic abilities or any supernatural gifts. Yet, there seems to be a presence in my house, a spirit, demon, angel, or something else that I can't explain. I live in Corona, California. I'm currently 18 years old, about to turn 19 in a few months. My interest in the supernatural only began 2 years ago, sparked by horror movies, ghost stories, and paranormal shows. It became a casual hobby, but I never dabbled in anything serious like using a Ouija board or attempting communication with spirits. While I know that even just opening yourself up to the supernatural can be an invitation, I'm still unsure if this was the cause of the recent activity in my home. It all started in the beginning of my senior year of high school. There were no major life changes, no deaths, no tragic events, just the normal stresses of studying and preparing for my future. The first strange event happened late at night. I woke up to something rubbing my right arm. Oddly enough, I didn't feel scared, just confused. When I looked over, I saw what seemed like an apparition of a hand stroking my arm. I stared at it for about 5 seconds before it disappeared. At first, I chalked it up to a vivid dream. After all, I was in the middle of sleep and thought that in reality, I would have been terrified by such a sight. Before this, I had always felt comfortable in my house. There were no bumps in the night or strange sounds. But after this dream, the house started to feel different, especially for me. My room is located at the end of a hallway, and every time I walked toward it, I would feel something grab my hips or waist, as though urging me to move faster. It felt like human hands, with no temperature, just a firm grip. The first time it happened, I was terrified. My legs gave out, and I couldn't believe what was happening. This sensation of being grabbed has happened several times since, making me uneasy enough to prefer all the lights on when walking to my room. The presence never does more than that. It doesn't hurt me or act aggressively, but it's unsettling. The activity seems to be mostly concentrated in the hallway, although sometimes I feel like it follows me around the house. Occasionally, I'll hear things moving in my room at night, like papers being shuffled or small objects falling. I've also noticed things misplaced, like finding bags or CDs in places I would never have put them, such as bathroom drawers. While I can't be sure that this is related to the spirit, I thought it was worth mentioning. Once I saw the figure clearly. I was closing my bedroom door, trying to be quiet because my baby sister was sleeping in the next room. As I turned around, I saw a tall, dark figure standing in the middle of the hallway. My first instinct was to think someone had broken into the house. But then I realized it wasn't moving. It was just standing there like a shadow in the shape of a man, maybe a little taller than average. I froze, terrified it would come closer or try to harm me. Its presence felt heavy, dark, and far from comforting. I quickly closed the door and stayed awake for the rest of the night, keeping an eye on my sister. That was about 6 months ago, and the activity hasn't lessened since then. Some days it goes quiet for a while, but then the strange occurrences come back. It seems to focus on me, almost ignoring the rest of my family. I can't say for sure if my baby sister has seen it. She's too young to explain, but her room is right next to the hallway where the spirit seems most active. The entity often grabs my shoulders or waist, as if to push me forward, usually not aggressively, but in a way that makes me uncomfortable. It has never spoken or made any verbal sounds, and I've never attempted to speak to it. I'm scared of what it might say or do if I tried. I live with my parents and 3 siblings, but none of them have mentioned anything unusual. My parents are devout Christians, and they've raised me the same way. They believe ghosts don't exist and that anything resembling one must be a demon. They also believe such things can't approach Christians. So you can see why I haven't brought this up to them. They would be very condemning if I mentioned it. I believe in God and pray for protection, but the presence hasn't gone away. I don't know what this spirit is or why it seems to focus on me. I haven't spoken to it, and I don't know its intentions. I'm not familiar with different types of spirits or entities, so I would greatly appreciate any insight or advice. I've often felt like I was losing my mind because of the things I've experienced throughout my life. It's hard to tell if what I've gone through is real or if it's all in my head. Without proof, just my story, it can feel crazy at times. But as I grew older and became a mother to my son Malachi, memories from my own childhood started flooding back. Things I had experienced that now seem almost unbelievable. Maybe it was because we did things we weren't supposed to, like playing with a Ouija board or experimenting with 6 pencils in a strange way. I haven't felt that kind of force in a long time, and to be honest, I don't want to ever feel it again. I think something has followed me since those times, or maybe I'm just sensitive to the energies around me. It all started when I was very young. I can clearly remember my very first terrifying experience. I was just a little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, and I was at home with my older sister Rebecca and my parents' goddaughter Lori. That day is burned into my memory. It's something I'll never forget, which is why I'm writing it down. One day I won't be here to tell the story, and no one will know what happened. It was a sunny afternoon, and I was happily playing in our backyard by the water pumps that circulated water to the swimming pool. Sonia, my older sister by 2 years, and I used to play in a hidden spot by our neighbor's yard. 3 fence boards were missing, creating an opening between our yard and theirs. Our property was slightly elevated, so we would sit on the slope, surrounded by leaves that had fallen from a huge tree. It felt like our secret spot, like something magical. Those were some of my favorite memories. I remember 3 palm trees standing in the distance, just beyond the missing fence boards. Everything was normal until, suddenly, I heard rustling in the leaves. It sounded like something was running through them, moving fast. I was frozen, my heart racing. What I saw next is something I'll never forget. It was like a scene from The Twilight Zone, where the man on the airplane sees that terrifying creature, but no one believes him. What I saw was a fleshy, grayish-green creature, about the size of a monkey. It had tentacle-like flesh instead of hair, thick like dreadlocks. Its large, slanted dark eyes locked onto mine, and its mouth was filled with sharp, knife-like teeth. I can still remember the way its saliva glistened as it snarled at me. It was like something out of a nightmare. The creature screamed at me, a chilling, blood-curdling sound that made my heart stop. It ran up the slope where Sonia and I used to play, leaping through the missing fence boards, and clung to one of the palm trees. Its long nails dug into the bark as it stared straight at me, and then it screamed. I screamed too, tears pouring down my face as I bolted for the house, terrified beyond belief. Lori rushed to me, meeting me in the family room while Rebecca stayed locked in her room, thinking I was just being dramatic. I was shaking, my heart pounding, unable to process what I had just seen. Lori laughed nervously, but she could tell from my face that I wasn't joking. When my mom got home from the flea market, she knew something was wrong. She could see it in my eyes that I had been deeply frightened by something. We didn't talk about it much for years, but my mom still remembers how scared I was that day. Years later, I read in a Sylvia Browne book about sightings of the chupacabra in 1985, the same year I had my experience in San Jose, California, my hometown. To this day, I don't know what I saw, but that memory has stayed with me all my life. My name is Wendy, and my story takes place a few years back in 2003 and 2004. At the time, my husband, 2 children, and I were stationed at MCOS Miramar in California. My husband was deployed overseas, and one night, while I was sleeping, I woke up suddenly because I felt someone pulling on my big toe hard. I instantly sat up, thinking it was one of my kids playing a prank. I yelled for them to get back to bed, but when I looked around, no one was there. My foot was under the covers, but my big toe was throbbing from the force of being pulled. I got out of bed, checked on the kids, and found them both fast asleep in their beds. Confused, I walked around the house, checking all the windows and doors to make sure everything was locked. And it was. I went back to my room, but there was no way I was going back to sleep after that. I sat in bed with the covers pulled up to my neck, wide awake for hours. The next morning, everything seemed normal. I talked to my kids to see if they had played a trick on me, but they had nothing to do with it. They were only 7 and 14 at the time. For weeks, nothing strange happened, although my son had started refusing to sleep in his room alone. He had bunk beds, so either my daughter or I would stay in the top bunk until he fell asleep, and then we'd return to our own rooms. I figured it was just something he saw on TV or a video game that had scared him. Not long after, my sister came to visit from Arizona. The first night, I made a bed for her on the couch in the living room, and her son slept in my son's room. I hadn't told her about the toe-pulling incident. The next morning, I found her packing up to leave. When I asked her why, she said she had been woken up in the middle of the night by the sound of my kitchen cabinets slamming shut repeatedly. She was terrified and decided she couldn't stay in the house any longer. We ate breakfast together, and I took a picture of her and my nephew before they left. When I handed her the picture, she pointed out that there was an orb in it. I didn't know much about orbs or paranormal things at the time, so she explained it to me before rushing out of the house. That night, while watching TV, I saw something strange. I was watching a broadcast about my husband's ship and the war when I saw someone walk from the hallway to the kitchen. Thinking it was one of the kids, I yelled for them to get back in bed. When I got no response, I went to check, but no one was there. Both kids were sound asleep in their rooms. I returned to the living room, only to see the same figure move from the hallway to the kitchen again. I checked again, but once more, there was no one there. After that, I started researching ghosts and paranormal activity. I read that digital cameras could capture orbs and even spirits, so I started taking pictures around my house, during the day and at night. I would often take 2 pictures back-to-back to ensure one wasn't blurry from movement. To my surprise, I found orbs in almost every room, especially in my son's room and the living room. My brother heard about my experiences and decided to visit, hoping to see something for himself. I took a picture of him while he was sitting on the couch, and when we printed it, we were shocked by the number of orbs surrounding him. Later, we learned that because of his pacemaker, spirits might have been drawn to him. As time went on, I started hearing voices. Sometimes I would hear my name and answer, only to find no one around. It was getting spookier, and I began visiting my parents in Arizona more often, staying away from the house whenever possible. A friend of mine even came over to take pictures with her camera, and both of our cameras captured orbs in my house. But when we took pictures at her house, nothing showed up. The most terrifying moment came when I took a picture of my living room and printed it. There, in the reflection of a small mirror, was a face. From where I had been standing, there was no way my face could have been reflected in that mirror, and I was the only one home. That's when I contacted a paranormal site in California. They were very interested in investigating my house, and we made plans for them to come after my husband returned from deployment. I didn't want to be alone during the investigation, and I wanted my kids to be at my parents' house during it. As we prepared for my husband's homecoming, the strange occurrences continued, but no one else in my family mentioned noticing anything unusual. After he returned, he received orders to move to Japan, so we packed up and left before the paranormal team could come. After we settled in Japan, my son told me something chilling. He said he was glad we moved because people weren't talking to him all night anymore. I had never told my kids about the paranormal activity, so this was shocking. My daughter later admitted that the reason she wanted me to remove the picture of my parents from her room in Miramar was because she had seen their lips moving at night, even though they were still alive. A year later, we heard that the entire street where we used to live had been bulldozed, and new houses were built, except on the spot where our house had been. Where our home once stood, there's now a children's park. This story takes place when I was a teenager, working for my mom back in 1971. My hometown is Big Bear Lake, California, an old mining town nestled in the San Bernardino Mountains. Back then, it was a quiet tourist town with no stoplights, and until 1970, no major fast food chains either. It's a place with its share of ghost stories, and this one is about a spirit named George, who resides at the Captain's Anchorage restaurant and bar. Back in 1971, it was called Stein and Sirloin, and my mom was the manager. Now, my mom was a force of nature, and she never let spirits or ghosts bother her. Nothing about the paranormal surprised her. She treated them just like she treated the living. If you got in her way, you'd better watch out. At the time, my younger sister Sheila and I worked there, bussing tables, washing dishes, and doing whatever else needed to be done. We were both well aware that things happened in that place. Things we couldn't quite explain. There was an old harpsichord in the upstairs dining room that would play on its own, a dumbwaiter that mysteriously ran during blackouts, and chairs that moved when your back was turned. My story is about one of those nights. One night after closing, Sheila and I were cleaning the downstairs dining room and bar while Mom was upstairs doing the books. We had refilled the salt and pepper shakers, removed the candles from the tables, and placed them on the bar. We wiped down everything, tables, bar, you name it. The last task was always putting the bar stools up on the bar and the chairs up on the tables so the cleaning crew could do the floors in the morning. Once we had finished, we threw our rags into the laundry bin and headed upstairs to let Mom know we were ready to go home. The stairs led up from the bar, and from the bottom steps you could see directly into the downstairs dining room. We had climbed about halfway when we saw Mom coming down, so we turned around to follow her back down. As we reached the bottom and turned left to face the bar and restaurant, Sheila and I both froze. Our mouths dropped open, and we just stood there, completely still. In the time it had taken us to climb 14 or 15 steps and turn back around. Mind you, we were the only people in the building. Every chair and bar stool was back on the floor, and the candles were back on the tables. It was impossible, but there it was. Sheila and I looked at each other, and then at Mom, saying, "What's going on?" Mom, though, just gave us that tired, "I'm over this" look and rolled her eyes. She started scolding, but not us. She was scolding George as if he were standing right there in front of us. "George, I can't deal with your nonsense tonight. You need to choose your battles better, mister." As Sheila and I started putting the chairs and candles back where they belonged, Mom continued, "George, we've talked about this. If you're going to hang around, you need to stop pulling this on nights when we're this tired." Then, with one final warning, "Don't push me, George. I'm serious." After we finished resetting the room, we locked up and went home. On the way out, Mom stopped by the dishwasher's place to let him know what had happened. She told him to call her if there was any mess in the morning, and she'd make sure the nonsense stopped for good. Of course, there wasn't any mess. Apparently, George knew Mom was serious this time. To this day, I swear George had a crush on my mom. I can't explain why, I just feel like he did. I wanted to share this story before anything about George shows up on TV. My best friend has been working at Captain's Anchorage for about 4 years now, and they recently told me that A&E came by to film something about George for a show. So I figured I'd beat them to the punch. This story took place in the house we lived in before my previous one, about 2 years ago. I've always been sensitive to the presence of ghosts, usually being the first to see, hear, or feel them whenever we moved into a new house. Even back in 5th grade, I remember constantly feeling like something was following me. But it wasn't until we moved into this house in a little town called Lancaster that things started getting intense. It was a 2-story, 3-bedroom, 3-bathroom house. I had never lived in a 2-story house before, so I was excited at first. My cousin and I began exploring the place, but from the moment we stepped inside, I could feel something strong in every room, especially in the master bedroom. While my cousin wandered around, I ended up in the master bedroom's bathroom, and the feeling there was different. I felt watched, disturbed, and frightened. Right away, I knew something was in the house. The strange thing was that the real hauntings didn't happen right away. They all seemed to build up and hit us at once. The first major event occurred one night when the adults were in the garage, laughing and having a good time. Out of nowhere, they heard a ghostly moan, the kind that sounded like someone in pain. They rushed out of the garage into the living room, but there was no explanation for the sound. For context, the way our old house was set up, you'd walk in the front door, and to the right was the living room. A few steps further was a hallway leading to a small bathroom, and beyond that, the kitchen was on the right while a second living room was on the left. The garage door was off to the side, leading outside to the backyard. After that moan, things calmed down for a little while until the next night. My sister came running downstairs in tears, saying she saw a little girl with a mean expression staring at her in the master bedroom. When my grandma went to check, the room was empty. Then, a couple of weeks later, we were all in the living room watching TV when we heard the sound of little feet running around upstairs. Once again, coming from the master bedroom, which was right above the living room and garage. The next strange event happened in November, about a month after hearing the footsteps. I had come home from school and was in my room when I heard a faint but clear voice say, "How was school?" I froze for a moment, realizing I was alone, but oddly enough, I wasn't scared. Somehow, I knew the ghost in my room wasn't harmful. I had the sense it was the spirit of a sad, lonely little girl who was trapped in the house and needed help. I replied, "It was fine," but she never responded. I was 11 at the time, pretty mature for my age, but I loved cartoons and still do. I would sit on my bed watching TV when I'd feel the bed shift, like someone had sat down next to me. When I turned to look, I couldn't see anyone, but the spot where the bed was indented was clear. I knew it was her, the little girl, sitting there with me watching TV. Even though I couldn't see her, I could feel her presence, and that did freak me out a little. These things always happened in broad daylight, usually around 3 or 4 in the afternoon, which was right when I got home from school. Underneath my bed, there was a little door leading to the space where the wooden planks supported the mattress. I would sometimes hear knocks, voices, and even screams coming from under there. One afternoon, while I was watching TV, I heard 3 distinct knocks from beneath the bed. I got so scared that I hid under the covers. I never saw the little girl in person, but I had visions of her. In my mind, she was about 5 or 6 years old, with blonde hair in 2 spiral ponytails. She wore a white nightgown and had a sad expression, holding what looked like a teddy bear. My parents said they would sometimes find me sleeping under the bed, but I have no memory of that. It wasn't until about 8 months ago that I told them about how I could hear and communicate with the spirits. I've always had this ability to see the life of a person or ghost and understand what happened to them just by looking at a photo. I can often predict what might happen, and I'm usually right. One more thing. There was also a lady in my parents' bedroom who used to scratch my dad's leg at night when my mom was asleep and he was up watching TV. It wasn't an isolated experience either. As I've taken time to catalog the various paranormal events that have happened throughout my life, I've realized that some memories have been buried deep in my subconscious. Since I was so young when they occurred, I didn't even recognize them as supernatural at the time. I've always said my experiences started at age 7, and while the most terrifying and significant ones did, other memories have resurfaced that aren't connected to the main event that's dominated my life. One of my earliest experiences happened when I was 5 years old, living in an apartment with my mother in San Diego. I had terrible nightmares every night, and my mom's room was right next to mine. After my mom remarried following my parents' divorce, my new stepdad wouldn't let me sleep near my mom's bed like I used to when I was scared. My bed was positioned right in front of my bedroom door, and we had a mouse problem in the apartment that we could never seem to catch. I was terrified that the mouse would run into my room, so I always kept the door open and watched the hallway anxiously. One night, while I lay in bed staring out the doorway, something darted past. We had a night light in the hall, and the figure briefly blocked out the light as it passed. It wasn't a mouse, it was much larger, but it wasn't shaped like a person either. The best way I can describe it is that it was fast and blurry, low to the ground, and impossible to define. We didn't have any pets, so I had no explanation for it. It scared me so much that I started sleeping by my mom's door, begging her to let me in, but she never did. She thought I was just trying to avoid bedtime. Looking back now, I realized that might have been my first paranormal experience. Later in life, my best friend Lizzie's grandfather was battling cancer and heart problems. Everyone knew his time was running short. One day, while the family was out getting groceries, they came home to find him on the back porch. He had passed away. I don't remember exactly how, but I think it was a heart attack. Whenever I visited their house, I could always hear the distinctive sound of his breathing machine. Loud and raspy, it was hard to miss. A few months after he died, I spent the night at Lizzie's house. Her grandpa never talked much to me when he was alive, just a smile and a wave. I was standing in the living room, where his bed used to be, waiting for Lizzie to get her shoes because we were going to a friend's house nearby. Suddenly, I heard the unmistakable sound of his breathing machine. It was so clear that if I had closed my eyes, I could have sworn he was still sitting there. But when Lizzie came back, I didn't mention it. I didn't want to upset her. Later that night, as we were getting ready for bed, Lizzie turned to me and asked if I had heard the breathing. I told her I had, and she started to cry. She said she wished he didn't have to wait there, especially since they were struggling to afford the house and would soon have to move. She told me that sometimes she even heard his breathing upstairs, a place he never went when he was alive because of his health. I told her that I didn't think he was in pain anymore and that maybe he was just checking on her. She cried even more, and we spent the night listening for the breathing and talking about her memories of him. It was the only paranormal experience I've ever had that didn't scare me. Instead, it was comforting to think that he could finally move freely, even upstairs where he couldn't go before. A few years ago, my bird, Charlie, passed away. He was a cinnamon cockatiel I had since I was 3 years old, and he was more like a companion than a pet. Charlie escaped from his cage often, and one day he got out when we weren't home. Unfortunately, we had recently gotten a new dog, and it managed to push open the back door, which wasn't properly locked. The dog found Charlie, and he didn't survive the encounter. Charlie's wings had been clipped wrong when he was a baby, so he couldn't fly. In the week leading up to this tragic event, I had been having dreams about Charlie every night. I didn't tell anyone about them, and when it was too late, I regretted not speaking up. I felt so guilty that I hadn't shared those dreams with my mom, thinking that maybe I could have prevented what happened. I had known Charlie almost my entire life. He sang with me, ate next to me, sat on the shower rod while I bathed, and watched TV with me. Losing him after all those years left me devastated, especially since it happened shortly after the death of my dog. Returning home from college to find both of them gone was overwhelming. One night, while home alone, I decided to take a bath to clear my head. As I stepped into the tub, I heard Charlie's chirp, the same high-pitched sound he made when he was excited. I even heard the fluttering of his wings, like when he used to jump down from the towel rack to visit me by the bath. My entire body froze as the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I knew he was there with me. I like to think he was saying goodbye because I haven't heard from him since. These events are different from the other supernatural experiences I've written about before. They aren't connected to the same entity I've encountered in my life. These moments feel like separate instances, perhaps more personal, and each one has left its own mark on me. This happened the Friday and Saturday before last. I was supposed to sleep over at my best friend Sierra's house. School let out around 3 p.m., so I had about 2 hours to kill before they came to pick me up. I hung out in the quad, did some homework, and waited. They were running late, so I just kept sitting there. Things were pretty normal until around 5:30 p.m. when I suddenly heard footsteps. like someone was running toward me. Thinking it was Sierra, I turned to look, only to see no one there. I shrugged it off and went back to reading. Not even a minute later, I felt an icy cold hand on my shoulder. I couldn't even scream. I was so shocked. Then my phone rang, making me jump. It was Sierra, her mom, and our friend Vicky letting me know they'd arrived. I grabbed my bag and bolted. As I left, I could have sworn I heard that same low chuckle I've heard before. Fast forward about 3 hours. Sierra, Vicky, and I were getting ready to go to the haunted hay ride carnival at Griffith Park. We were all excited. It was going to be a blast. Sierra's mom, who's super cool and knows all about the weird stuff that happens to us, called out that it was time to go. The carnival was amazing. We had a ton of fun, running around and trying and failing to avoid people in costumes. The hayride itself was incredible. People in terrifying costumes would jump in our faces, screaming or breathing heavily, completely in character. The old Griffith Park Zoo was turned into an asylum exhibit, and you can only imagine how creepy that was. Then came the haunted maze, which was hilarious. We kept getting lost and ended up bumping into the same ghoul, with a leather bag over his head multiple times. Then we heard the sound of a chainsaw. Sierra and her mom ran off, laughing, while I ducked into a small indentation of hay. Vicky just took off. A few seconds later, I was face to face with a chainsaw-wielding clown zombie, shouting incoherently. I couldn't help but laugh. I walked away, still laughing, with the clown right behind me. I eventually found Sierra and Annalie, and we all cracked up when we saw my new friend. Then Annalie asked, "Where's Vicky?" I started to say she ran off, but then the clown, in a chilling growl, said, "I'll get her." Moments later, we saw Vicky running faster than we'd ever seen her run, screaming at the top of her lungs, with the clown following closely behind in mock pursuit. We were doubled over in laughter, especially when she flung herself into Sierra's arms at full speed. Classic. That night was mostly filled with fun, except for sensing something strange in the air, but nothing out of the ordinary happened, at least not yet. In the morning, after Vicky left, it was just me and Sierra. Her mom had gone to work, and that night we were planning to see Paranormal Activity 2. How ironic, right? Sierra's room had this poster board from an old school project, which she used to block out light from the window, making it feel like nighttime in there all the time. It was the perfect setting to catch up on our supernatural experiences. I told her about the strange 000-000-000 phone calls I'd been getting, and she shared some creepy stories from her time in Fresno. Eventually, we started talking about this guy. For privacy's sake, I'll leave out his name. He used to be a good friend of ours until he started dabbling in dark magic and what we suspect might be necromancy. Whether he intended to or not, he was summoning some seriously bad stuff, and Sierra and I could both attest to it. He'd been acting strange lately, always lying and, it seemed, trying to hurt us. Sierra and I practice white magic, so we were both at our wits' end. As we talked, Sierra kept glancing nervously at her big vanity mirror. Out of curiosity, I glanced too. That's when I saw them. A pair of slit, bright blue eyes and a wide, eerie grin, like something out of Alice in Wonderland's Cheshire Cat. I asked her, "Do you see that?" She nodded, frightened but excited. We quickly dove under the covers. A few moments later, she peeked out and said she saw a black hand emerge from the mirror, followed by a tall, headless torso with outstretched arms hovering above us. We were both freaking out, trying to calm down. She told me that our friend had given her some weird runes to copy down, supposedly to ease her nightmares. We decided we needed to investigate before going to the movies. We used her divining rods to ask questions, and they crossed 3 times, suggesting that our friend was somehow involved. We prayed, then used my scorpion pendant to try and communicate. As we asked basic questions, the presence claimed to be our friend, but I had a bad feeling. When Sierra asked if the runes would be fatal, it hesitated before answering no. By this point, I felt a chill down my spine and knew this entity wasn't who it claimed to be. I decided to try a trick. I asked, "Is your middle name Robert?" It answered yes. That's when I looked at Sierra in terror and told her to end it. We prayed again, said goodbye, and stopped the session. Her whole left arm was freezing cold and wet, though there was no visible liquid. She got up, acting apathetic, completely out of character, and started getting ready to leave. I told her to check herself in the mirror to see if she still looked like herself. When she did, her pupils were swirling, pitch black, and she had this murderous expression on her face. I froze, screaming. She snapped out of it, and we both started crying and praying hysterically. After that, the rest of the day was uneventful in terms of paranormal activity, but we were shaken. I'm 21 years old, and I've been wondering whether the things I've experienced throughout my life are truly supernatural. I've had several incidents in the past that make me question if I'm dealing with multiple entities, and I'd really appreciate your opinions. First, a bit of background about me. I come from a large family, especially on my mother's side, and we have very mixed views on religion. For example, my grandmother is a devout Christian, but her father, my great-grandpa, is more of an atheist, believing that when we die, that's it, no afterlife. I'm currently at a point in my life where I believe in something, but I also have doubts. If you asked me directly, I wouldn't say God doesn't exist because even the thought of saying that feels wrong to me. I'm not religious, and I never have been. Humanity has turned religion into something messy, often violent, so I tend to stay away from it. But I do believe in something, though I haven't quite figured it out yet. I've developed some unusual ideas about life and the afterlife, but I won't dive too deep into that now. If anyone is curious, I'm happy to bounce ideas around with you. Now, on to my experiences. I've often wondered if I have a guardian of some kind. When I was a little girl, my grandmother told me that I had an angel by my side, always protecting me with their arms wrapped around me. I didn't think much of it at the time, but flash forward years later, and certain events have made me question if she was right. When I lived in northern Nevada, winters were freezing cold. There are two specific instances that stand out to me. The first was in elementary school. I was standing outside by the swings during winter. Nevada's cold is intense, especially with the wind. As I stood there, freezing, I closed my eyes for a moment. Suddenly, I felt something strange, a warm barrier surrounding me. The wind was still blowing, but it didn't touch me. It felt like someone's arms were wrapped around me, protecting me from the cold. The sensation lasted about 15 seconds, and then it was gone. My grandmother's words about my angel came flooding back. The second time this happened, I was in high school, standing outside in the snow with that same bitter cold desert wind. Again, I felt that warmth and the sensation of being protected just like before. I've often wondered if this was my guardian angel or some kind of divine protection. Could it have been? It felt so real, like actual arms around me, but I often dismissed it as my imagination. Another experience involved my cat, who seemed to sense something I couldn't see. But first, let me give you some context. When I was around 6 or 7, before we moved to Nevada, my mom had a best friend named Steve. He wasn't a lover, he had a girlfriend, but he was like a brother to my mom, always there for her and very kind to my little brother and me. One day, Steve's dad, who was divorced, asked Steve to take his girlfriend's son out for the night. My mom was invited too, but she couldn't go because she had 2 young kids to care for. That night, Steve went out with this guy, and he was never seen again. His body was later found at the bottom of a well with gunshot wounds to his head. The guy he was with confessed to killing him. There was no reason for it. This guy was just a bad person and had even admitted to killing another person after Steve. My mom was devastated. Steve had been there for her through everything, including her escape from an abusive marriage. I remember that time so clearly because we had to move my mom out while her abusive husband was at work. He wouldn't let her leave, and when she tried, he became more violent. One of my earliest memories is being in the back seat of my mom's car, screaming, as he ran us off the road and punched through the driver's side window. The sound of the glass breaking is something I'll never forget. After Steve's death, we had several cats, and I started noticing that they would stare at something for long periods. I never thought much of it until one summer before my junior year of high school. I was home alone, watching Lord of the Rings with my cat, when she started staring at the ceiling above my left shoulder. I turned around, thinking she might be watching a reflection from a passing car outside, but there was nothing there. She continued staring for minutes, not just seconds. This wasn't the first time either. Our cats had always done this. They would fixate on something I couldn't see and stare for so long that I would get weirded out and call their name. They'd look at me, maybe jump into my lap, but then go right back to staring at the same spot. That day, Steve's name came to mind, and I started wondering if he was still watching over us. I've never seen a ghost or spirit, but I'm sensitive to energies, and I believe animals can sense things we can't. Was my cat seeing Steve? I have a couple more recent experiences I'd like to share, but I wanted to get people's thoughts on this part of my story first. Do you think I'm dealing with multiple entities? I've always felt like my mom, my brother, and I have had some sort of guardian around us, but could Steve be one of them? I know my story isn't as dramatic as some of the others, but these thoughts have been with me for over 10 years now. If you have any insights or ideas, I'd love to hear them. I'm open to questions and different perspectives. Just please be kind. Cruelty isn't welcome here, but honest inquiries are. This experience happened during the summer of 2005. At the time, I had been living in Corona for about a year when I reconnected with an old friend. We started hanging out again, and one day, after lunch at a local restaurant, I was exhausted. I asked if I could take a nap in her bed while she went out with her boyfriend. She agreed, and I slept deeply. So deeply that it was already midnight when I finally woke up and decided to use the restroom. As I got up off the bed, something unexpected happened. A force pushed me back down, face first, and held me there. I couldn't move, speak, or even pray. The name Jesus wouldn't come out of my mouth. To make things worse, I could hear loud, hot, heavy breathing in my ears. Then, in a robotic voice, it whispered, "You're going to die tonight," followed by an evil, chilling laugh. This went on for what felt like 15 minutes. I was completely helpless, trapped. Eventually, I just gave up and accepted whatever was happening. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped and I was able to get up. Panicking, I ran to look for my friend. I found her passed out on her sister's bed, drunk. I shook her awake and said, "Jen, you need to come with me to your room, or I'm leaving and driving home to Corona. I don't care if it's 2 a.m. She groggily got up, and we went to her room together. I tried to explain what had happened, but she wasn't in the right state of mind to understand. Eventually, we both lay down, and I thought having her by my side would keep me safe. But that wasn't the end of my terrifying night. As I began to drift off to sleep again, it happened. This time, I was on my back, and the same force was pinning me down. I tried to fight it, but I was completely paralyzed. I then felt something pulling me up toward the ceiling. I turned and could see my body lying on the bed below me. I tried to grab onto the TV, but the force was too strong, and I was thrown against the ceiling. I floated toward the door, which swung open, and that's when I saw 3 casual-looking men standing just outside the room. They couldn't enter, but they started talking to me in normal voices, telling me I was going to hell and that there was no God. They said if God existed, he wouldn't let this happen to me. For a brief moment, I almost believed them, but then I fought back, saying, "Yes, there is a God, and you can't hurt me because I'm with the Lord." For a second, doubt crept in, but I clung to my faith. After that, I woke up and whatever had been attacking me was gone. That was the first time something like this happened, but it wasn't the last. More episodes followed, and others witnessed what I went through. Shortly after that, I was at home, thinking I was safe when it happened again. I slipped into a sleep I couldn't wake from, and the same thing started happening. I was weeping, trying to pray, but instead, a demonic voice came out of me. When I finally broke free, I ran to my grandma's room, where I made a bed next to her. She was very ill at the time. As I lay there, I saw visions of red, glowing eyes staring at me, faces everywhere. The next morning, my brother asked me, "What was wrong with you last night? Why was Dad cussing and yelling at you?" He said he heard someone say, "You piece of %, why are you crying?" He thought it was our dad. I explained that Dad had been nowhere near me. He was asleep the whole time. My brother then said he'd also heard someone praying, but in a man's voice. I told him it was me trying to say the Our Father. I know this all sounds unbelievable, but I experienced it, and I don't wish it on anyone. For a while, I thought the nightmare had ended. In 2006, I was expecting my first baby girl with my husband. A week before my due date, I stayed at my friend Jen's house again because her mom's house was close to my OB/GYN. It was daytime, so I wasn't scared. Her mom suggested I take a nap, and I agreed, lying down on the same bed where the first incident had occurred. That's when it happened again. But this time, the force wasn't as strong as before. I heard the same robotic voice whispering in my ear, "Gucci, Gucci goo." I bolted out of that room so fast. I made up an excuse to leave, telling her mom I had gotten a call from my husband, and I was out of there in minutes. Thankfully, since getting married and having children, these episodes haven't happened again. My faith in God is stronger than ever now. I know that there is both good and evil in this world. I don't know why this happened to me, but it was terrifying, and my loved ones saw what I went through. For a while, I thought I was going crazy, but I want to share my experience with others so that if anyone else is going through something similar, they know they aren't alone and they aren't crazy. This is a spiritual world, and while evil exists, we can overcome it with the grace of God. Stay strong, and don't let darkness take over. My husband and I raised our 5 kids in a 2-story, 3-bedroom, 3-bath home. The upstairs had all the bedrooms, and the master bedroom was as big as the entire living room downstairs. We had a lock on our bedroom door because our teenage daughters had a habit of hijacking my husband's t-shirts to wear. So, whether we were at work during the day or out for the evening, no one was supposed to be in our room. Despite that, our kids would often tell us they heard footsteps in our room, day or night. We'd hear them too, sometimes while we were downstairs eating dinner or watching TV. We'd go up to check, and of course find nothing. But that was all that ever happened, just footsteps. They didn't hurt anyone, so we never thought much of it. Then one night, everything changed. I woke up suddenly for no apparent reason. I was on my back, and when I opened my eyes, I turned my head to check on my husband. He was there, fast asleep with his back to me. I lay there for a moment, looking around, when I noticed a soft white light coming from my right side, low to the ground. Curious, I turned my head to find the source of the light, and that's when I saw them. Standing right next to my bed on my side were a little doctor and a little nurse. The doctor couldn't have been more than 3 feet tall, if that. He looked about 80 years old, with a big nose, a long chin, and wisps of hair on his mostly bald head. He appeared to be operating on my leg, though I couldn't feel anything. The nurse stood behind him, peering over his shoulder. She had gray hair pulled into a bun, and her outfit looked like something from another era. An old black dress with a long white apron and a traditional nurse's hat. She looked to be around the same age as the doctor. I was shocked, but not scared. I felt no fear, just surprise. I remember thinking, what the hell is this guy doing? I couldn't feel what he was doing to my leg, so my curiosity kicked in. I wanted to see it better. After all, I'm the type of person who just has to know. So I did what any curious person would do. I tried to sit up. As I lifted my head from the pillow and brought my arm up to support myself, the doctor turned to look at me. That's when he grinned at me. A grin that revealed a mouth full of sharp, pointed teeth. He let out a low grunt, and then, out of nowhere, he punched me right in my right eye. I gasped, completely stunned. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I paused for a moment, trying to process whether I had actually felt the punch. Was it real? Was there pain? Yes, there was pain, but it wasn't like the kind of pain you'd expect from being punched. It was dull, almost muted, not the sharp pain I remembered from a punch I got when I was 12. That one had hurt. This felt different, dull but still real. I looked over at my husband, hoping he'd seen or heard something, but there he was, still lying with his back to me, fast asleep. Okay then, what was I supposed to do now? I decided that if my husband wasn't waking up and the doctor didn't want me to get up, then I wasn't going to push it. I wasn't scared, just confused. So I laid my head back down on the pillow, without moving my head, because I didn't want to risk getting punched again. I glanced over at the two figures. They were still there, standing by my bed. Okay then. I closed my eyes and went back to sleep. I never had anything like that happen to me again. We continued living in that house for another 7 years after that night, and we moved away about 10 years ago. But I've thought about that night so many times, trying to figure out what it could have been. I know it wasn't a dream. There are moments in life when you're forced to stop, step back, and take a deep breath. These moments don't happen often, but when they do, they leave you with a sense of disbelief, confusion, and sometimes even fear. One of those moments for me came on December 31st, 1998, at 11:45 p.m. New Year's Eve is always a busy time, especially for young couples looking to celebrate. My wife and I were no exception. We were determined to have our biggest New Year's Eve celebration yet. My boss had invited us to the Queen Mary's New Year's Eve party and ballroom blowout in Long Beach. The tickets weren't cheap, and the ship was supposed to have multiple dance floors with DJs on every level. I had visited the Queen Mary a few times when I was younger, but it had been years since my last trip. My wife, born and raised in Los Angeles, had never been, so she was thrilled by the idea, even though she was 2 months pregnant with our first child. We had only a few days to pull everything together. Shopping trips were in order, as well as a visit to the barber and salon. We were both excited to welcome the new year in such a grand setting. Around that time, the cigar boom was in full swing, and people were rediscovering the joy of a good hand-rolled cigar. Coming from a cigar-loving family, I was excited by this resurgence of interest. My grandfather and father had taught me everything about cigars, where they're made, the curing process, shapes, sizes, and the proper way to light one. Who knew cigars had so much to them? I mention this because a cigar would play an unexpected role in the events that night. My wife wasn't a fan of cigars, but she tolerated my indulgence as long as it was in moderation and never in the house. I had a Cuban Hoyo de Monterrey that I had been saving for a special occasion, and New Year's Eve on the Queen Mary felt like the perfect time to enjoy it. I packed my cigar essentials into the pocket of my new blazer, and off we went. When we arrived, we had no idea how packed it would be. Parking was insane, but we managed to squeeze into a spot by the pier and headed in. We found my boss and his date at one of the bars near the first dance floor. The ship was beautifully decorated. You could tell professionals were behind the setup. I ordered a scotch on the rocks and got juice for my wife, who didn't drink. One of the perks of her not drinking was that I always had a designated driver. After a bit of socializing, we hit the dance floors and had a fantastic time. After a few hours of dancing, we decided to take a break and head up to the top deck for some fresh air. The night was crisp, and you could smell the salt and sea foam as we strolled hand in hand under the stars. After a while, my wife, feeling winded, sat down to rest. I took the opportunity to ask if she minded if I lit up my cigar. She agreed, albeit with some hesitation, as long as I did it a few feet away. I walked up to the tip of the ship, ready to enjoy my Cuban cigar. I savored the earthy aroma as I prepared to light it. I had just brought the cigar to my lips and was about to flick my torch lighter when I felt a slight tap on my shoulder and heard someone say, "Do you have a light?" Without hesitation, I turned around to offer my lighter, and to my surprise, there was no one there. I stood there, cigar dangling from my lips, completely dumbfounded. I looked around, scanning the deck, but all I saw was my wife a few feet away, smiling at me. Confused, I started darting around, looking for whoever had tapped me, but the deck was empty. It was just the two of us. My wife noticed me acting strangely and walked over, asking if I was okay or if I had lost something. I quickly asked her if she had seen anyone tap me or pass by. She shook her head and said, "No, you've been standing there alone the whole time." Determined to figure out what had just happened, I asked her again if maybe someone had run by or ducked into a corner. Her answer remained the same. I was completely alone. After a few minutes, we went back inside to join the countdown for the new year. At midnight, we kissed as balloons rained down, and the crowd screamed, "Happy New Year!" But even amid the celebration, I couldn't shake what had happened on the deck. I still have that cigar to this day. I keep it in my humidor, and every now and then, I pull it out as a reminder that what I experienced was real. I've only shared this story with a few close friends and family members, until now. So, if you ever visit the Queen Mary in Long Beach, California, don't forget to bring along your favorite cigar. You never know who might tap you on the shoulder and ask for a light. I moved to my grandma's house for a while when I was at a crossroads in life, unsure of what to do next. It was a peaceful place, which I needed, as I had just come out of a tough situation, the result of some naive decisions. I was recovering, and moving in with my grandparents seemed like a good choice. They were stable, wise, and I felt I could learn from them. But there was one thing I hated about the house. It always felt like someone was watching me. They had moved into the house 7 years prior, and I had always felt an unsettling presence there. I was the one who helped them move in and stayed for the first week, so I became familiar with that eerie feeling early on. Every time I visited after that, I couldn't shake the sensation, especially in the hallway that connected the bathroom, computer room, and laundry room. That hallway always gave me the creeps. Still, nothing ever happened. It was just an uncomfortable feeling I tried to ignore. But after I moved in, things began to escalate. Whenever I was up late at night, long after everyone else had gone to bed, I could feel the presence watching me. At first, it was just that eerie sensation, but over the course of a couple of months, strange things started happening. One night, my aunt came to visit and was staying in her old room. I was in my room watching TV when the door slowly opened. I assumed it was her, since our rooms were right next to each other. But when I looked, no one was there. I felt startled but brushed it off, thinking maybe she was playing a prank. I went to her room, opened the door and shouted, "Gotcha!" But the room was empty. My aunt was in the shower, so it couldn't have been her. I shrugged it off, but by the end of her stay, something similar happened to her. She came up to me and said, "No, it couldn't have been you." Confused, I asked her what she meant, and she explained that her bedroom door had opened on its own. She added, "You couldn't have made it here this fast. This is creepy." My aunt doesn't like talking about ghosts, so I didn't push her on it, but I could tell she was freaked out. After she left, the door incidents continued. The door would open on its own, and I began to imagine that maybe the spirit didn't like closed doors. I started to think about who the spirit could be. Maybe it was someone who used to live in the house. Perhaps a parent who didn't want to be left alone. I asked my grandma about the previous owners. She told me it was an Italian family who had raised their kids in the house. I stayed in what was likely the son's room, and my aunt's room had probably belonged to the daughter. On the cement pathway leading to the front door, the family had etched their names into the ground, so it was clear they had been connected to the house. My grandma said that the mother had passed away first, followed by the father. The children had sold the house after that. Whenever I was alone, I could feel a masculine presence, and I started to believe that it was possibly the father. Whoever it was, they began to grow frustrated that I wasn't trying to communicate with them. Candle flames would flicker strangely when the presence was around, and one of the most unnerving moments happened when I asked in my head, "You're here watching me, aren't you?" At that exact moment, the candle flame grew by at least an inch. I could feel the presence right next to the candle. Our dog, a normally tough pit bull, got scared, tucking her tail between her legs and whimpering as she ran out of the room. She had growled at the presence before, but usually, she just got frightened and cried until we let her out. The spirit seemed to get angry when I didn't engage. Sometimes the lights would go out violently, only to work perfectly when someone else entered the room. Once, a light bulb even burst when I could feel the spirit following me. Then, one night, I had a dream, or at least I think it was a dream. Felt so real. I woke up in bed, looking at the candle I had lit earlier. The flame had gone out, and a small wisp of smoke rose from the wick. I could hear my grandpa snoring, and my grandma groaning, probably annoyed by his loud snores. As I lay there, still warm under my covers, I noticed a shadowy butterfly fluttering above me. It wasn't a normal butterfly, it was more like a shadowy figure. I remembered something a friend's mom had once said about seeing black butterflies as a sign of death. I tried to catch it, but my hand passed right through it. It was made of energy or something spiritual. Then, It started to flutter as if it was telling me to follow. So I did. In a peaceful daze, I got up and followed the butterfly down the hallway, the place I always hated most. As I reached the hallway leading to the laundry and computer rooms, I saw a vaporous cloud form. The presence had always been strongest in this part of the house, and now I was seeing something materialize. From the vapor, a man stepped out. He was tall, with balding curly hair, wearing a simple white t-shirt and jeans. He looked like he was in his late 40s, and he just stood there, staring at me. His expression was blank, emotionless, but I could see every detail of his face, like I was looking at a real person. I panicked and started yelling, "Get out of here!" I even tried to hit him, but nothing I did had any effect. I felt helpless and began to cry, realizing there was nothing I could do to make him leave. Maybe he was bound to the house. Eventually, I gave up and followed the butterfly to the living room. As I reached the front door, I saw a strange shadow crouched over it. The butterfly flew out of the house, and I woke up, just in time to hear my grandpa's alarm clock go off, just as it had in the dream. The transition from dream to reality was so seamless. It was hard to tell when I had actually woken up. I believe the butterfly was trying to show me what was really bothering me in that house. After that experience, I moved out and went to live with my boyfriend. I never helped the spirit, and I sometimes wonder if I should go back, but its presence unsettled me so much. I'm too sensitive to these things, and I get scared easily. This story is about the first time I encountered a human spirit, specifically my grandmother after she had passed away. I was very young at the time, around 6 years old, and didn't fully understand the concept of death or what it meant to lose someone I loved. As a child, I spent a lot of time with my grandmother on my father's side. She wasn't the typical grandmother who baked cookies or cakes, but she always made me feel loved and welcome when we visited. Unfortunately, our time together was cut short when she passed away, and the memory of her being there one day and gone the next is still vivid in my mind. I don't remember the last time I saw her alive. I just remember that suddenly, she wasn't there anymore. When my grandmother passed, my parents told me that she had gone to heaven. They likely explained we'd see her before she was gone for good, but at that age, I didn't fully grasp what was happening. I remember her wake, which was held at a church. There were a lot of people, and I recall it being a bright day, with sunlight streaming through the tall windows. I sat next to one of my older cousins, holding a bottle of orange juice. I understood that it was a serious occasion, but I didn't quite appreciate the gravity of it. At some point during the service, my father came over and asked if I wanted to see my grandmother. I said yes, and he took me up to her. I vaguely remember him telling me she was sleeping, but I knew better. Something inside me told me that she wasn't asleep. She was dead. I could tell just by looking at her that the life had left her. I may have even told my father this, though I can't fully recall. After that, I returned to my seat, swinging my feet back and forth as I waited for the service to end. When it was over, everyone went their separate ways, but we were scheduled to meet again at my grandmother's house for a final vigil. A few days later, we went to her home in the evening. The adults went inside while the kids stayed outside to play. Curious about what was happening inside, I tried squeezing in to take a peek. All I saw were pictures and candles, so I went back outside. I don't remember much else from that night, except that I likely fell asleep on the car ride home. Later that night, I woke up needing to use the restroom. I turned on the hallway light as I left my room, even though the restroom was right next to me. I also turned on the bathroom light before stepping inside. After I finished and washed my hands, I opened the bathroom door, and what I saw next was something I never could have anticipated. Standing there, fully formed but with the lower half of her legs fading into nothingness, was my grandmother. It was her unmistakably. She was just standing there, watching me. The sight of her startled me so much that I ran straight back into my room and hid under the covers. I eventually managed to fall asleep again, but I never forgot that moment. Since that night, I haven't seen my grandmother again. I've spoken to her many times, though, and I believe she hears me when I feel a sense of peace or well-being afterward. I'm glad she visited me that night, even if it scared me at the time. I only wish I had mustered the courage to speak to her, to say goodbye. These stories take place in my parents' home, which was built in 1927, about 21 years after the city was established. It's a modest colonial-style house, roughly 2,000 square feet, sitting on a 7,000 square foot lot. The house has a few curious crawl spaces. A large cupboard under the stairs, what seems to have been the garage's attic, a small space near the windows at the far end of my room, and the main attic. The attic connected to the garage can only be accessed through a small door in my sister's room. When my parents bought the house, it wasn't in great condition, though structurally sound. It had been left unmaintained while on the market and had fallen victim to vandalism. The most significant damage was a hole in the wall, which we quickly repaired. We also found some crude occult symbols and makeshift Ouija boards, but none of us, including my mother, who is a medium, sensed any malevolent energy in the home. Everything seemed fine. That summer, we moved in. Within the first week, we replaced the carpeting, and within a year, we remodeled the upstairs bathroom, updated the plumbing, and landscaped the yard. At first, things were uneventful until the paranormal activity started. It didn't take long for us to realize we weren't alone. Within the first month, we became aware of the spirits in the house. The first ones we noticed were children. Often, we'd be downstairs and we'd hear the sound of children running and playing upstairs, particularly in my sister's room, which is directly above the dining room. Sometimes, the chandelier in the dining room would sway slightly as if reacting to the movement upstairs. As time went on, the activity increased, and we became aware of more spirits. I'd sometimes hear footsteps in the attic above my room late at night. On other occasions, while staying up late doing homework in the downstairs office, I'd hear footsteps coming down the stairs, pausing, and then going back up. I would ask my dad the next day if he had come down to check on me, but the answer was always no. One particularly unnerving experience happened late one night. I was using the bathroom near the office when I heard someone descending the stairs. The footsteps stopped abruptly at the second step, and I felt an intense gaze, like someone was watching me. I quickly finished up and checked, but no one was there, and my parents' bedroom door was shut. It wasn't long before we learned more about the house's history. The previous owner, who had lived there for 30 years, stopped by one day. She explained that she had sold the house for personal reasons but had hoped to buy it back when it went on the market. During her visit, she mentioned that her husband had died of liver failure in the hospital, never getting the chance to return home. She also shared some unsettling information. One of her sons had lived in the attic. This revelation disturbed us. The spirit that often stood at the top of the stairs felt possessive, as if the house belonged to it. I had already heard footsteps in the attic at night, and my father, who had ventured up there once, said it was unbearably hot and mostly full of pipes and wooden beams. We could only speculate why the woman's son had lived up there, and it certainly didn't bring us any peace. Another night, I had a strange encounter in my bedroom. I was lying in bed, praying as I usually did, when I became aware of hoarse, labored breathing coming from my closet. I stopped breathing for a moment, making sure it wasn't me, but the sound continued. Though a bit unnerved, I calmly asked the spirit to leave me alone, and it did. Later, on another night, I was lying in bed when I heard footsteps pacing back and forth between my room and my sister's room. The footsteps would stop at each door, pause for a few seconds, and then continue. After a while, I decided to check who was outside, but, of course, no one was there. Toward the end of my junior year in high school, I had a health scare. My appendix burst, and I spent a couple of weeks in the hospital. When I finally returned home, I wanted to get back to school as soon as possible. On my first day back, as I sat at my desk, waiting for class to begin, I suddenly heard a gentle voice whisper my name in my ear. It was unfamiliar, but I could clearly hear it. A mental image of a girl with red hair and blue eyes appeared in my mind. Later, I told my sister about the experience. She mentioned hearing a similar voice, and when I asked her to describe the girl she pictured, she perfectly described the same girl I had seen. Another strange incident occurred one night while I was doing homework in the office. Our new dog, who often stayed with me downstairs, became visibly distressed when the bathroom door near the office started wiggling, as if someone was trying to open it. The door pushed open but then stopped moving altogether. My dog, usually calm, appeared upset. One of my final encounters happened after I graduated from high school. I was sneaking upstairs late at night, trying not to wake anyone, when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, but no one was there. Once I got into my room and closed the door, I heard footsteps pass by my bed and head toward the windows facing the street. My curtains began to move, and I was startled. Frustrated, I told the spirit to stop, and it did. The last significant experience I had in that house occurred a few months later. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when I felt the temperature drop around me. I stayed still, and then, to my surprise, I felt a small hand press into the palm of mine. This time, I wasn't startled. In fact, I smiled, realizing that the spirit of a child had gently placed its hand in mine. Although we experienced many strange encounters in my parents' home, I never felt threatened. People passing by would often stare into the upstairs windows, and even our dogs would sometimes fixate on the windows, as if they could sense something. Despite the activity, I never sensed any malevolence. The spirits in that house may have made their presence known, but they never meant us any harm. I've always been fascinated by the idea of spirits. Shows like Most Haunted and Ghost Hunters captured my imagination every time they were on TV. But despite my curiosity, a strong sense of self-preservation kept me from actively seeking out the paranormal. My philosophy was simple. If a ghost has something to say to me, they'll come find me. In 2009, I was about a year away from graduating from film school when a project came up. We had to create a 3-minute television segment showcasing places to go and things to do in the Los Angeles area. Immediately, I thought of the Queen Mary. I had never been aboard her, but I'd always been curious. So, I reached out to their PR department, and they graciously agreed to let me film on the ship. With my cameraman in tow, we made our way down the 405 to Long Beach. Stepping aboard the Queen Mary, I felt no sense of dread, no need to turn around and leave. In fact, I felt quite comfortable. I've always considered myself somewhat sensitive to energies, able to pick up on the emotional vibes of a place without being a full-fledged medium or psychic. That sensitivity hadn't failed me before, so I was content to continue the tour that had been arranged for us. Most of the tour was fascinating from a historical perspective, and everything felt calm. We walked across a catwalk high in one of the former engine rooms and into a narrow hallway about 45 minutes into the tour. I was leading the group right behind the tour guide. As we reached the end of the catwalk, the guide stopped and opened a door to our left. That's when everything changed. The calm, safe feeling I had been enjoying immediately vanished. A rush of air came through the door, and every hair on my body stood on end. I instinctively took 2 steps back as an overwhelming sense of awe washed over me. Every fiber of my being screamed, "Do not go in there!" I glanced at my cameraman, who was watching me with a raised eyebrow. I felt foolish for reacting so strongly to what seemed like just a door opening, but there was no way I wanted to step into that room. As the others filed past us, the guide announced that I couldn't stay in the hallway because we wouldn't be exiting through the same door. Reluctantly, I followed. My cameraman entered first and stood just inside the doorway, waiting for me. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into a room I had heard of but never been in, the infamous first-class pool area. We stayed in the pool area for about 20 minutes as the guide told us about its legend. The room was believed to contain a vortex to the other side, open to any spirits, not just those who died aboard the ship. The space was eerie but also fascinating. For those who haven't been to the Queen Mary, the first-class pool area is split into 2 levels, the pool level and the observation level. Near the end of our time in the room, I found myself on the observation level, along with just my cameraman and the tour guide. Everyone else in the group was on the pool level below. I stood with my back against the wall, facing my cameraman, who had his back to me and both hands on the camera. The guide was about 10 to 15 feet to my right. Everything seemed to be going smoothly, until I felt a slow, deliberate tug on the hood of my hoodie. It felt as though someone had brushed by me or was trying to get my attention. I didn't think much of it at first and turned to my left, assuming someone from the group had come up behind me. But when I looked, no one was there. I frowned, slightly confused. I turned to my right, no one there either. The guide was still standing several feet away, far too distant to have touched me. I turned in a full circle, but there was no one near me at all. Suppressing the urge to scream like a child, I calmly walked over to the guide. I could feel invisible eyes watching me the whole way. I told him what had just happened and that I felt the need to leave the room immediately. He smiled knowingly and began gathering the group to leave, saying that he had been waiting for something to happen. Apparently, during every tour he gave, at least one person had an experience. That day, I was the one. Before I begin, I want to say how addicting this whole thing can be. The more I think about it, the more confused I get. For years, I've tried analyzing what happened, deconstructing it, putting the pieces back together, but I never seemed to get anywhere. So, I figured I'd write it down and leave it to you. Maybe you can help a brother out. This all happened in my grandmother's backyard, which is now my mother's. I was about 7 years old, maybe close to it. It was the mid-'80s, and there I go aging myself. It was during the day, and I was completely alone. My grandmother, mom, and brother had gone to Gemco, which was literally at the end of our block. By the way, it's a Target now, so you know this was a long time ago. Back then, being left alone wasn't a big deal. So there I was in the backyard doing what I loved, gardening. Yeah, I was an odd kid. I remember watering our grapefruit tree, which had the best grapefruit ever, by the way. I was standing there with the water hose, watching the depression around the trunk fill up with water. Black ants were panicking, like it was their version of Noah's flood. Then, out of nowhere, Dino, our chow chow, started barking like crazy. He was behind me to my left. At first, I thought he was barking at me, which was strange because Dino and I were best buds. But then I realized he was barking at something behind me. I turned around, water hose still in hand, and saw nothing. I glanced back at Dino, and he was barking beyond me, upwards. I turned again, this time looking up at the roof of the tool shed. There, standing rigid and tall, was a man. He was incredibly skinny, dressed in all black, his clothes form-fitting. His eyes locked onto mine, and I froze. He didn't just look at me, he glowered. There was something about him that felt wrong. I didn't get a good vibe at all. I was terrified, completely still. My mind raced, and I thought, maybe if I look down, this will all go away. So I dropped my gaze, but Dino was still going crazy. The fear built up, and I couldn't take it anymore. I dropped the water hose and ran as fast as I could toward the kitchen door. Halfway through the backyard, Dino stopped barking. I slammed the door shut behind me and peeked through the kitchen window. Nothing. No one. Just Dino still standing by the grapefruit tree, looking up. Here's where things get really weird. That tool shed? There's no way anyone could stand on it, especially a tall, heavy man, without caving it in. My mom used to make us clean the leaves off the roof sometimes, so I know for a fact it couldn't support any real weight. Plus, the shed was made of cheap aluminum, so if someone had climbed on it or jumped off, it would have made a ton of noise. But there wasn't a single sound. It was like the man had appeared out of thin air and disappeared just as quickly. I sat in the living room, waiting for my family to get home. Luckily, it wasn't a long wait. I told my mom what happened, and she seemed alarmed. She praised Dino for his barking, but I was left wondering what I had just witnessed. Fast forward to when I was 19. I hadn't thought about that incident in years. One night, my friends and I had gone dancing, and after the club, we hit up an IHOP before heading home. We were standing outside the restaurant, chatting, and I took out my keys to unlock the car. I was talking to my friends across the car roof when I glanced beyond them, and there he was, the same man. He was standing across the small parking lot, partially hidden in some bushes. Except he wasn't just in the bushes, he was inside them. It's hard to explain, but it was like the bushes didn't affect him at all. Like they didn't matter. He had the same tall, skinny frame, the same black clothes, and the same terrifying look on his face. Just like before, I pretended I hadn't seen him. I looked down, unlocked the car doors, and got in. The entire thing happened in seconds. Before I closed the door, I glanced back up, and he was gone. I didn't say anything to anyone, and until now, I've never talked about it. I've always wondered, who or what was that, and why did he appear to me again? I haven't seen him since, But I'm already 30. So is he due for another show? I really hope not. It was 2005, and I was expecting our second child when my fiancé, son, and I decided to move closer to my mom in Gustine, California. The house we found was an older home, sitting out in the middle of the countryside. We had only been living there for about a month when things started to feel off. At first, it was subtle, just strange shadows out of the corner of my eye and odd noises that didn't make sense. My son's toys would start playing on their own, balls would bounce without anyone touching them, and there were unexplained knocks within the house. Doors would open after I had closed them, and the baby monitor would pick up loud static in the middle of the night, sometimes even a voice that vanished the moment I got up to check on my son. It was unsettling, but I tried to brush it off. Things escalated. My phone would leave me messages filled with static, yet it never rang. I told my fiancé about all of it, but he just thought I was overtired from the pregnancy. He didn't understand how real it felt. My son started waking up screaming in the middle of the night, refusing to sleep alone or even play in his room during the day. Months turned into a year, and by then we had 2 children. The presence in the house became stronger. I could feel eyes on me as I did the dishes, folded laundry, or took care of the kids. I even began hearing footsteps around the house. One night, the footsteps followed me as I left my children's room and walked down the hallway. I rushed back to bed, and as soon as I got under the covers, I felt someone sit on the foot of the bed. But when I looked, no one was there. That was the beginning of things becoming physical. One night, I woke up and saw a boy standing at the foot of my bed, just staring at me. I immediately sat up, but he vanished. My son had slipped into our bed that same night, and as I reached over to pull him closer, he suddenly screamed out in pain, "No! Stop it! You're hurting me!" His hands were on his face, and when I pulled them away, I was horrified to see fresh scratches, as if someone had clawed at him. A couple of nights later, I had a dream, or at least I think it was a dream. I was startled awake by a loud noise, like something was being dragged across the kitchen floor. I got up to investigate and open the bedroom door, but I stopped dead in my tracks. Standing right in front of me was an older woman. She had long hair, and she was dressed in a black gown. But she wasn't standing, she was floating. She just stared at me, and a few feet behind her, I saw the same little boy from before, dressed in a white-collared shirt and black pants, also staring. The woman locked eyes with me for a few seconds, and then she screamed, loud and terrifying, before lunging at me. She went through me, couldn't breathe, couldn't move. It was like I was frozen, trapped in that moment. Tears rolled down my face, and I tried to call out to my fiancé, but no sound would come out. I prayed silently, trying to get control of my body, and finally, I managed to walk backward, slowly, until I sat back down on the bed. When I woke up, I found myself in the exact same position as I had been in my dream, sitting on the edge of the bed. It felt so real, her scream, her anger, and the coldness when she passed through me. I woke my fiancé, crying and telling him everything that had happened. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I couldn't bear the thought of seeing her again. That was the final straw. I couldn't live in that house anymore. We eventually moved away, but my mom still lives across the way from that house. Now, she too is experiencing strange noises and unexplained scratches in her home. I don't know what happened on that property or in those houses, but whatever it wasn't good. When I was 4 years old, my family moved to a house near the Pacific coast, specifically in Malibu, California, and that's when it all started. My first month in the house, I shared a room with my sister, although she wasn't too happy about it. The room had windows on one side with no curtains. About 2 months after we moved in, I had my first real scare. My bed was closest to the windows and the door. I was trying to sleep, but around 1 in the morning, just as I was starting to drift off, I heard a harsh voice scream my name in my ear. I was instantly wide awake, and when I looked towards the doorway, I saw the tall outline of a human figure. The shadow stood there for a while, watching me, and then walked across the room, fading with each step until it disappeared completely. I stared at the corner where it vanished, trying to process what had just happened. As I looked around the room, I noticed it was getting brighter. By the time I turned to face the windows fully, it was already daylight. I screamed. Somehow, what felt like only 30 minutes had passed, but it was morning. It doesn't sound terrifying, but the experience left me feeling like whatever I had seen had the ability to manipulate time. The next incident didn't happen to me, but to my sister's close friend, Samantha. I was about 7, and my sister and Samantha were 12 or 13 at the time. One night, our parents were out at a company meeting, and my sister was watching me. I was playing computer games while Samantha was lying on my parents' bed watching a movie. My sister, Holly, had just gone to the bathroom when the TV turned off suddenly. Samantha and I looked at each other, confused, and were about to call Holly when all the windows and doors in the room flew open with a huge gust of wind. Papers swirled around the room, and Samantha screamed, running out, closely followed by Holly, who had come running in when she heard the noise but became just as frightened. I wanted to leave too, but for some reason I stayed. I don't know why, but just before everything stopped, I heard a voice whisper in my ear, "Ready." I froze, and there it was again, the shadow. The following year, I changed schools. I was 8 and just starting 2nd grade. The school had only about 35 students, but the grounds were huge. I had to walk 15 minutes just to get to my classroom. One day, I decided to use the bathroom near the entrance gate to save time. Ever since the shadow had reappeared the year before, I was always on edge, waiting for another encounter. After standing at the bathroom doorway for a few minutes to make sure everything felt normal, I stepped into a stall. While I was midway through, I heard someone come in with what sounded like shopping bags and enter the stall next to mine. When I finished and bent down to pick up my hair clip, I glanced over, expecting to see feet, but there was no one there. My heart raced and I bolted out of the stall. As I did, the mirrors lining the walls started shaking and cracking. I ran out of the bathroom as fast as I could. I stayed at that school for 3 years, and every day I felt compelled to use that bathroom, almost like if I didn't, something bad would happen. Only one other strange thing happened there. A voice in the bathroom screamed, "Kelly," several times, getting angrier with each repetition. Up until the Kelly incident, most of my encounters were confined to my home. I'd hear voices, see figures in corners, feel like I was being watched, and experience my bedroom door slamming shut randomly. But then, strange occurrences started happening everywhere. Once, I was in detention for being late too many times, and a boy came up to me wearing a green shirt and blue jeans. He had blonde hair, and I slightly tilted my head to look at him. But when I turned fully to ask what he wanted, he vanished. I asked the teacher if anyone else was in detention with me, but she said I was the only one there. One of the most vivid experiences happened a year ago. My sister, Holly, and some of her friends were downstairs, and I was in my room, lying on my bed with my laptop. I was almost done checking my emails when the lights started flickering. Before I could even process the uneasiness bubbling up inside me, there was a massive crash from the sliding door leading to my porch. The door began shaking violently. I jumped off my bed, yanked my bedroom door open, and stumbled into the hallway. The moment my door slammed shut behind me, the shaking stopped. I ran downstairs, where Holly was in the kitchen, happily waving goodbye to her friends. They were completely unaware of what had just happened. It hit me then I was alone in this. No one else felt it. No one else saw it. I was the only one experiencing this torment. Then, as Holly closed the bathroom door, I turned toward the kitchen counter separating the kitchen from the TV room. Out of nowhere, a bright light in the shape of a human appeared behind the counter. It grew brighter and brighter until I had to shield my eyes. Terrified, I tripped over a stool and fell onto the marble floor, dazed and terrified. Things were getting worse. That night, I had a vivid dream. I was an orphan living with my brother, Connor, in a foster home near a lake in the woods. I believed the house next door was haunted, but when nothing happened to my new family, I let it go. One day, my sister and I went downstairs to our room, and suddenly, we knew something supernatural was with us. The air grew hot, and when we tried to run upstairs, the stairs were gone. I felt weak, like I was dying. My sister kept screaming my name, Kelly, over and over. The next day, After that terrifying dream, I decided I needed answers. I couldn't ask my parents. They would think I was crazy. So I searched for information about the previous owner of our house. After digging through my mom's files, I found his name, Nick, and a disconnected phone number. I searched online and found a local article saying Nick had disappeared into the ocean while trying to retrieve his surfboard during a storm. Days of searching led to him being declared dead. It didn't make sense. My mom had always told me Nick was an experienced surfer who had won multiple contests. Why would he go into the ocean during a storm, knowing the risks? Something was wrong and I had to find out why. When I was in my early 20s and newly married to Larry, my first husband, now ex, we rented a small cottage from my grandmother on her property in Marin County, California. The property was 5 acres and had been in the family since 1933, when my great-grandparents moved there from Oakland. The cottage, already there when they bought the property, was old, and in 1986, strange things started happening, things I still can't fully explain. The first incident was small but unsettling. I came home one day to find all my carved, wooden animal figurines turned around, facing the opposite direction from how I had left them on the mahogany table by the picture window. I knew Larry wasn't the type to play pranks, so I asked him if he had moved them, but he denied it. Not long after that, I started hearing knocking sounds. It wasn't a pounding, but a persistent rap, rap on the walls. It started between the living room and an extra room that was more like an enclosed porch. I thought maybe it was an animal at first, but the knocking kept happening, at different spots around the house. When I called Larry into the kitchen to hear it, it would stop as soon as he walked over. This went on for a while, frustrating me because Larry didn't believe me. We had roll-up shades on the windows, and often, they'd fall off without reason. I checked for drafts or any other cause, but there was none. Things started to go missing: cassettes, books, and other small items. Once, a heavy candle fell from the bookshelf on its own. In my frustration, I yelled, "Stop it!" As more strange occurrences happened, I began to feel like I was being watched. In the living room, I'd sit at a rattan desk to write, and sometimes I could just feel someone behind me. The hair on the back of my neck would stand up. I remember spinning around one evening and saying out loud, "I know you're here." That's when things became terrifying. One night, as Larry and I slept, I woke up to see a black figure standing right beside me. It was holding a sawed-off shotgun, pointing it directly at my face. I screamed louder than I've ever screamed before. Larry jumped out of bed, fumbling to turn on the light. When the light came on, the figure was gone. The following week, the figure came back. This time, it had a 6-bladed knife, one handle with 6 curved blades all pointing downward, ready to strike me. I remember blinking, trying to convince myself it wasn't real, but I was fully awake. The figure raised the knife above me as if to plunge it down. I screamed, and again, Larry woke up and turned on the light. The figure disappeared. These terrifying encounters continued. One night, the figure appeared with a sword, the moonlight glinting off the blade as it hovered over me. My screams woke Larry every time. The figure only appeared once on Larry's side of the bed, holding a baseball bat. I was so terrified that I tried crawling under Larry to get away from it. I was at my breaking point. One night, Larry's snoring got so bad that I kicked him out of the bedroom and made him sleep in the porch room. That night, the figure appeared again. This time, I screamed, jumped out of bed, and ran to the window. In a panic, I pushed it open, knocked out the screen, and was halfway out the window when Larry flipped on the lights, calling to me. I'm grateful he did, because I was about to fall 2 stories onto brick steps below. Once, I saw a white figure in the house. Early in the morning, I opened my eyes and saw it standing in the hallway between the bedroom and the bathroom. I gasped, and when it realized I could see it, it ran into the kitchen. Horrified, I jumped out of bed, grabbed my father's hunting rifle from under the bed, and locked myself in the bathroom. I loaded the gun and stood trembling, yelling threats at the entity. After several minutes, I worked up the courage to leave the bathroom and check the house. Nothing was out of place, and no doors were open. I became so afraid of going to bed that I would stay up late in the living room, dozing off while watching movies. The fear was constant, This all came to an abrupt end on January 8, 1987. It was around 7 a.m., and I was asleep when I was woken by a strange noise. My first thought was that deer had climbed onto the roof, which happened occasionally. I lay back down, but then I heard a disembodied voice in my ear saying, "Get up!" Startled, I jumped out of bed and opened the bedroom door. The kitchen was filled with smoke. The cottage was on fire. I ran to the porch room and stupidly opened the door. Flames engulfed the room. I called 911, and the dispatcher told me to get out immediately, which I did. The fire consumed the house, and we lost everything. I escaped with only my pajamas. That was the end of the strange occurrences. My grandmother rebuilt the cottage that year, but Larry and I moved to Sonoma County, and I never experienced anything like that again, not even a nightmare. Strangely, after the fire, my grandmother received a letter from a former tenant who had rented the cottage in the 1950s. The woman, Mrs. Smith, said her husband had forbidden her from writing, but now that he had passed, she wanted to ask if anyone else had experienced strange things in the cottage. She described seeing entities, including an old man. My grandmother and I were shocked, remembering a tenant from the 1970s, Barbara, who had also reported odd happenings. We thought Barbara was crazy at the time, but now we weren't so sure. Fast forward to 2005. The cottage and my grandmother's house had been sold after her death, but my parents still lived on the property. The new owner of the cottage told my mother that her niece had seen a black figure standing by the bay tree outside the porch room window. It had terrified her so much that she left and never came back. When my mom told me this, I couldn't help but say, "See, you all thought I was crazy." I was one of 4 women who experienced these entities in the cottage. I've wondered my whole life what they were. The black figure felt malevolent, almost sadistic, as if it enjoyed causing fear. My grandmother once told me that there was an old Native American burial ground near the cottage, though I don't know if that's true, but it's a possibility, given the area's history. I've never been religious. I'm agnostic and was raised without a specific faith, but I've always been open-minded. I just want to understand what this black figure was and why it seemed so intent on terrifying me. I live in El Monte, California, and I've experienced strange occurrences in my house, especially in my bedroom. I suffer from insomnia, so I'm often the only person awake after 3 a.m., and it's during these late hours that I hear and see things that leave me feeling unsettled. I've tried researching paranormal activity tied to my house, but I haven't been able to find anything. I could really use some help because things have gotten too strange to ignore. One of the most startling things I've seen was an old ghostly woman in a blue dress in the kitchen. It was the middle of the night when I heard noises coming from the kitchen. When I went to check, there she was, playing with the knives from the drawer. I panicked and ran back to my room, which is usually my go-to reaction when these weird events happen. Other strange things have occurred in the house as well. My mom collects porcelain dolls, and I've always been horrified of them. They sit on a shelf in the den, which is where I'm writing this now. The dolls often disappear and reappear without explanation. There are about 15 of them, but right now only 4 are on the shelf, even though there were more yesterday. One of them, the one in a graduation suit, is always in a different position whenever I look at it. It scares me to no end. When my room was about to be remodeled, most of the furniture was moved out except for a fold-away bed. I invited my friend Sasha and my cousin Elizabeth to spend the night. We were lying down next to the window, and when we turned off the lights, we suddenly saw what looked like blood splatter all over the window. We screamed and quickly turned the lights back on, but the blood was gone. When we turned them off again, something began trying to come through the closed window. Elizabeth said it looked like a clown, but I saw something more like an old woman in a dress. Sasha couldn't get a clear look at it. Later, when the room was being remodeled, the workers and my dad heard the doorbell ring, followed by footsteps on the roof. My dad's friend went to answer the door, but nobody was there. That's when my dad said something that made my heart stop. "We don't have a doorbell." I've had other unsettling experiences too. When I was about 9, my sister and I were sharing a room around Christmas. I was playing with a pink stuffed bunny and put it away in my sister's closet. That's when I noticed the toy was bouncing as if it were dancing. I backed away, and then it winked at me. It was just a stuffed toy, completely lifeless. I freaked out, grabbed my sister, and told her to get the bunny. She brought it to me, but it didn't do anything. Scared out of my mind, I ended up ripping its head off and throwing it away. What else could I have done? Another time, I was sleeping near the window and woke up in the middle of the night, as usual thanks to my insomnia. A picture of my sister holding her newborn son in the hospital caught my attention. To my horror, I saw the picture moving. My sister in the photo turned to face me, winked, and dropped her baby. I was so terrified that I hid under my blankets and cried myself to sleep, unsure of what else I could do. The next week, my nephew had to go to the hospital for surgery after something went wrong with him. The timing still haunts me. Years ago, my sister, who used to sleep in the room that is now mine, had her own encounter. She woke up one night to see a floating figure hovering above her. It was a strange combination. The figure had the face and feet of a baby, but the body of a woman wearing an old folklorico dress and a huge black hat. The figure just stared at her. Terrified, my sister shut her eyes, and when she opened them again, the figure was gone. My uncle, who slept in my room before I was born, also had an unsettling experience. He got up in the middle of the night to get a glass of water during a scorching summer. As he tried to leave the room, something pushed him back. When he looked up, he saw a massive red figure in a black cape standing in the doorway. Startled, he backed away, and the figure vanished. My uncle thought he had imagined it, so he brushed it off and continued to the kitchen. When he poured a glass of water, he noticed it tasted off, like rust. He looked down and saw that the water was brown. Disgusted, he dropped the glass, but as it hit the floor, he heard a scream. He looked toward the living room window and saw a naked woman covered in blood running toward the sliding glass door. She slammed into it, leaving a bloody handprint. My uncle passed out and woke up the next morning, sitting in the middle of the floor in a trance, surrounded by cockroaches. No matter how many he flicked away, they kept crawling back toward him. My parents found him that way, and he's been traumatized ever since. I don't know what to do anymore. The bizarre events are becoming too much. I'm exhausted from the constant whispers, the sound of footsteps down the hall, and the strange happenings all over the house. My insomnia isn't helping, and I can't leave the house. I don't have the means to. I've had a lot of experiences with ghosts and entities, but nothing like this. For the first time, I think I've met a spirit that has a strong connection to music, specifically Nine Inch Nails. It all started when I moved into a new house in the spring of 2010. My family and I had been living there for about 8 months by then. We moved in September of 2009, and around my birthday in October, I got my first iPod Classic, which I was so excited about. I immediately downloaded a bunch of music, including a lot of Nine Inch Nails, one of my favorite bands. Over the next several months, I spent my time listening to music, forgetting all about my previous interest in ghosts and the paranormal. By April 2010, I finally bought the iPod speaker set I had always wanted. I was with my friend, and after we left the store, we walked home together since she lived nearby. When I got home around 7 p.m., I tried to avoid my parents so I could rush to my room and set up the speakers. As soon as I was done, I plugged my iPod into the dock and randomly picked a song. It happened to be Gave Up by Nine Inch Nails, a fast-paced hard rock song and one of my favorites. I cranked the volume all the way up and started jumping around, dancing like crazy to the music. But as I started to calm down, something bizarre happened. A cup that had been sitting on my dresser flew across the room and smashed against the wall. I froze, my heart racing. I quickly stopped the music, and the room became eerily quiet. I was sitting on my bed, terrified, but eventually I stood up and went over to clean up the broken pieces of the cup. As I knelt down to pick up the glass, I looked around the room, making sure nothing else was going to happen. Out of sheer frustration and fear, I yelled, "Why'd you do that?" Suddenly, I noticed an indentation on my bed, like someone was sitting there. My body went cold. I shot up from the floor, unsure of what to do. Without thinking, I demanded, "Show yourself." But as soon as I said it, the pressure on the bed disappeared. I waited, standing there for what felt like forever, but nothing else happened. After about 30 minutes of silence, I came up with a strange idea. Maybe if I played another song, the spirit would respond. I played a song by a different artist, nothing. I tried again with another song, still nothing. Finally, I played another Nine Inch Nails song, and within minutes, I felt a cold touch on my back. I didn't move. I wasn't scared, just curious. The touch wasn't harmful, and I had this feeling that whoever it was didn't want to hurt me. I clicked on yet another NIN song, and this time I heard something, a voice. It was faint but clear. "I'm here," it whispered. It sounded like a young man, maybe a teenager. I didn't tell my parents or anyone else. I wasn't sure how to explain it, but I knew something was in my room, and it seemed to respond to Nine Inch Nails. The next day, I made a playlist on my iPod, putting all the Nine Inch Nails songs in one place. I went back to my room, plugged my iPod into the speakers, and played one of the songs. I sat on the floor with a light blow-up ball and said, "If you're here, can you move this ball? I just want to know if you're here." Nothing happened right away, but after a few more seconds, I added, "I like NIN. Do you?" And to my surprise, the ball started slowly rolling away from me. I was excited but still confused. I needed to know more about this spirit. I ran to my mom, who was in the kitchen, and asked if she knew anything about the people who had lived in our house before us. She didn't, but she promised to ask the landlord. In the meantime, I went back to my room and tried to learn more about this entity. I started using a tape recorder to ask questions. I wasn't sure if it would work, but I gave it a shot. I asked, "What's your name?" I waited a few minutes, then played back the tape. To my shock, I heard the name Matthew. Next, I asked, "How old are you, and how did you die?" I stopped the tape, played it back, and this time I heard a single word, "a rope." My heart sank. I realized Matthew must have hung himself. A few days later, my mom came home and told me she had spoken to the landlord. She learned that the family who lived here before us had 3 sons, Matthew, Samuel, and Dominic. When she mentioned Matthew, I felt a chill. My mom went on to tell me that Matthew had committed suicide by hanging himself. I was speechless. I slowly walked back to my room, tears welling up in my eyes. As I sat on my bed, the music still playing, I felt a familiar cold touch on my back. I whispered, "I know you killed yourself, Matthew." "Why?" The ball rolled gently toward my feet, as if in response. In the weeks that followed, I continued communicating with Matthew. Even without the Nine Inch Nails music, he would sometimes respond, but the connection was always stronger when I played NIN. It seemed like he only stayed in my room or near me, because my family never mentioned any strange experiences elsewhere in the house. I didn't tell them about Matthew either. I liked keeping it just between us. Then, a month later, my mom told me something that stunned me. She had met Matthew's mother through the landlord, and they had lunch together. Matthew's mom talked about her son and mentioned that he had loved Nine Inch Nails. My mom even told me, "You two would have gotten along really well if you had known each other." I smiled and thought to myself, I already know him. To this day, I still feel Matthew's presence, with or without the music. I feel like he's become my best friend from the afterlife.